Go Figure TV. Revolutionary salute. Revolutionary salute. Like, share, subscribe. Welcome to the House of Revolution. You know I'm your humble host, the Yao Mean of Revolution. And we got a World War III update. Zelensky and NATO, they very worried about what Trump and Putin talked about. Putin knows Trump is stalling. Before we get into that, be sure to wipe your feet. That means hit the like button. You in the House of Revolution. Like, share, subscribe, support the platform, y'all. Let's get to the content.
It happened exactly the way the government told us that it did.
All right, let's talk peace, shall we? This is the story we've been waiting for. We're hoping for a long time. Peace in Ukraine. Could this actually happen? Just a short time ago, President Trump got off the phone with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Putin then came out to the podium to say a few words about how that phone call went. Watch this.
Добрый вечер. Меня коллеги просили сказать несколько слов о результатах нашего телефонного.
The results of our telephone conversation with the President of the United States. Indeed, this conversation took place. It lasted more than 2 hours. I would like to note it was very informative and very frank. So that was, and it goes on from there. He spoke for about another few minutes. The President of the United States also releasing an update from his Truth Social account saying just completed a 2-hour call with Vladimir Putin. Basically says we're trying to end this catastrophic bloodbath. There's tremendous opportunity for Russia to do massive trade deals with the United States, jobs, wealth. The potential is unlimited. He says he also spoke with Zelensky. He basically says, peace, peace, peace. Let the process begin. Let's bring in Colonel Douglas Macgregor, who worked for President Trump and has, of course, been calling for peace from the very beginning. Make peace, you fools. Is it too early, Colonel, for us to be popping the champagne here? I get very excited when I see this from both sides. I don't want you to rain on my parade. I don't want you to.
But he wants an honest answer.
But I want an honest answer. Is my champagne going to be flat?
I would keep the cork in the bottle and keep the champagne cool.
Okay.
I think that, first of all, President Putin is always polite, and he was polite in his comments. I don't know the substance of the whole discussion. The only way to know that is to see the transcript. But I think from some of the things that I heard him say in the rest of the presentation, that the Russians are certainly ready for a ceasefire, but provided the preconditions for such a thing are actually met. And remember, the Russians have unchanging goals, and he reiterated that. Their position is established, it's well known. We want a neutral Ukraine. We want a denazified Ukraine, and so forth. We're not interested in simply stopping the war in order to pause long enough for Ukraine to receive more weapons, ammunition, and support from Ukraine's allies in Washington and in Europe. There's no evidence at this point in time that those goals and those conditions, frankly, are going to be met. Now, I know that the Pope has now offered to mediate, and that's nice. And I'm sure that President Putin will be delighted to have the Pope step in and do whatever he can do.
There's nothing to mediate. There's no Trump. Trump is trying to buy for time. He's trying to play games. Putin know that. And like Conor McGregor said, Putin just being nice. The demands is the same. It's over for the Nazis. There would never be a NATO. You never have your troops in Ukraine. Everything our feet is under, plus what we've been telling them to land, we've been telling them to leave in the Donbass, that's ours. All of the 4 regions we took, that's ours. Goodbye to Odessa too, because they soon won't take that. But Crimea, you never had that again. That's the same. And Trump got to understand that. Trump got to finally just tell the truth. Either he can accept it or he can't accept it. One or the other. But him saying, "Oh, because I'm looking at the European news. They're saying it's Putin playing Trump. Well, what else can Trump do? But the surrender of NATO in Ukraine. It ain't no other negotiations. He can say forget it. Putin been playing games, and then he could say total war, and then Putin just would destroy everybody near Ukraine.
I think we have to keep in mind that Putin wants good relations with the United States. He's dealt with President Trump before.
But see,
and
it's disgusting when Trump's saying better business relations. And I quit talking money. He talking about the survival of his nation. See, that's disrespectful because that, like, I'm telling you, that's like Putin being nice. That's like you saying you can bribe the Russians. America owes $35 trillion. You're broke. See what they said? We're going to do business with you. That's our business as the Americans. The government is broke, 35 trillion in the hole. Putin laughing because he know that. A broke nation trying to bribe Russia. But that's the best Trump can offer is better business relations. That means you have nothing to offer because Russia don't need your fucking business relations. You're supposed to do the right thing and say you're in the war, no more Nazism in Ukraine, and NATO won't be there. Then, hey, you're a peacemaker. But then NATO going to say that's capitulation and surrender. Call it what you want. That's your peace.
He knows that President Trump has frequently said things that ultimately didn't turn out to be accurate because he was unable to impose his will on his own government. So I think, to sum up briefly, yeah, I'm sure it was constructive. I'm sure there will be some discussions now between the Russians and the Ukrainians. Whether or not that's going to lead to a substantive ceasefire is very unclear. And I think the chances are not that great.
What do you make of Zelensky being excluded from this talk, which seems to be the most fruitful? What it says to me is that his presence is like when mommy and daddy are talking, you need to be quiet, that he is only a hindrance. And what he said in his X post after he spoke to President Trump is, it is crucial that the United States not distance itself from these talks, meaning I can't do it. I'm at the kids' table still. It's got to be the United States and Russia.
Well, it always had to be us because we are the driving force behind the war. If you take us out of the equation, there is no war. There would not have been a coup in 2014. Right. Wouldn't have had any biolabs. The massive quantities of weaponry, which President Trump also approved and sent to Ukraine while he was in his first term, those things wouldn't have happened. So this thing can only end ultimately with one of two things happening. Either we stop supporting Zelensky, full stop, and that has to happen, and we pull all of the Americans in and out of uniform out of Ukraine. That's one way to end this. It's a very serious action that guarantees the first serious, decisive step in the direction of a ceasefire. If that doesn't happen, the only other alternative is that Zelensky and his inner circle probably don't survive too much longer. The Russians cross the Dnieper River and seize Kiev and probably also eventually Odessa. Maybe one before the other, I don't know. But right now, the Russians are moving to the west, and they're going to continue to move until they've closed up on the Dnieper River. That's not going to stop. And they've made that very clear that whatever goes on during these talks.
See, Putin is in the power position. They over there. They crushing Ukraine right now. Ukraine is on the verge of collapsing militarily right now. That's why Trump's sitting there and I just need peace. Oh, we know you need some peace, nigga. Because it's all going to be over real soon. And that's what's crazy. See, Putin, he understands the brilliant man. He really trying to save Trump and the U.S. from total humiliation. Because he know a humiliated foe could be a dangerous foe. He trying to have him, give him a little grace to act like you could bring some peace. But if you don't want to do it the Russian way, which is you make sure Zelensky finish and you tell him, hey, they got to sign this surrender. If you don't want to do it that way, then like Colonel McGregor say, they're just going to take Kiev, hang Zelensky, all the generals. That's going to be total humiliation. Total humiliation. Anybody caught in Kiev get hung, that's total humiliation for Trump and NATO.
Until the conditions that they've outlined take place, nothing will change. They will continue to advance.
Absolutely.
So under those circumstances, that's why I think it's very unlikely you're going to get an end to this thing. And the sad part of all of this is I think because of the positions that President Trump has taken that have been very, very misguided in my view, he is really irrelevant to the process. Unless he intervenes to stop the flow of armaments, cash, ammunitions, and support to the Zelensky regime, and then pulls us out, frankly, whatever he does is not going to be taken very seriously. And right now, there are a lot of people in Moscow saying to Putin behind the scenes, why bother? Why believe anything the man says? What evidence do we have that the Americans are serious about anything? Nothing survives an election cycle. The policies are too incoherent and unpredictable. So stay the course, finish the war, end it on our terms, whatever that turns out to be. I think all of those things are happening in Moscow. But I think Mr. Putin knows President Trump. He wants to be polite to him. And I'm sure he said nice things to him and said yes. But he also said, as I understand it, a ceasefire provided the preconditions we've discussed in the past are met. And until those are met, and that includes an end to all of this military aid to Zelensky, I don't see anything halting. I think the war will continue and the advance to the West will continue.
I mean, you're hitting at the heart of the matter here, which is that Putin holds all the cards. You've seen Europe, of course, aligning itself. They want to funnel more weapons and support to Zelensky. Even when Trump and J.D. Vance had that White House meeting where they chastised
this support that they're talking. You can send Ukraine $300 billion. All Zelensky and his minions is going to steal it. It won't equal no military success. They're running out of people. This is a fact. They run out of people. They're even running out of mercenaries that they can buy. All the Colombians is dead. They've been getting all of the mercenaries from all over the world. They dead. That's serious business. That's the only reason. That's what Trump really trying to settle this thing before the big time humiliation comes. Unless NATO enters the battle, it won't be no bodies for Ukraine. They are collapsing, and that's why you don't see on the news them talking about no more war. They don't even talk war. Show us the fucking war. Hell no.
Zelensky and said, we're not going to be a party to this. You don't hold the cards here. It seems what can you worked for President Trump? What can he do here, if anything, to stop this? Does he have the power just over Europe to say, stop sending weapons into Ukraine, stop supporting this, stop supporting Nazis inside of Ukraine? All of that. I mean, it seems like an incredibly tall order. If not, then are we just going to continue this? Does this war just continue for years?
Well, listen, first, you're right. Absolutely right, Clayton. He can bring tremendous pressure to bear on our allies. There are things he can do. But for whatever reason, he has chosen not to do that. And I don't see any evidence that he's suddenly going to turn around and do it. That's why the easiest thing for him is to put the Europeans who refuse to play ball on his terms in an indefensible position. What is that? Pull the plug on Zelensky. Pull the plug on Kyiv. Sorry, folks, we're out. We've had it. We'll be happy to host, the peace conference, but we're out. We're not doing any more. Remember that the European leaders are not reflecting the views that their populations hold. No one in Germany wants to go to war with Russia. Forget it. I don't see any evidence that anyone in France does. Now, I don't know what is going on in Great Britain, and I think it's almost impossible to tell. That place is so heavily censored and so oppressive these days, I can't evaluate. But my sense tells me that there aren't very many Englishmen lining up to go to fight in Eastern Europe. The Poles have made it abundantly clear they don't want anything to do with the war there. Now you have the crazy Estonians that have tried to provoke the Russians, and now they're in a lot of trouble because the Russians have taken a tanker, and they made it pretty clear that they could shut down Estonia, in 24 hours, unless the Estonians shut up and start behaving like adults. But they don't want to do that. They don't want to be drawn into that. And of course, that's exactly what somebody like Mark Rutte would cheer on. He'd love to see that because he's part of this globalist elite class that wants to lead Europe, further down on the road into hell, where they practically hit bottom as it is. So no, I think it's a matter of pulling the rug out from under the Europeans by taking decisive action on his part to say, that's it, I'm out. Now, he could do that. He could wait to see what this new discussion amounts to. Wait to see if the Ukrainians go in there and take a different position. The Russians have some wiggle room. There's no question about it. They would like to end this thing. How wide and broad that wiggle room is, I don't know, but I think it exists. But the Ukrainians are the ones that have just said flat out, no, they're not going to recognize the legitimacy of anything that the Russians have done, because that would put into jeopardy the raison d'etre for their entire regime. So my suspicion is that if this fails, the smart thing for President Trump to do is say, well, I've talked to all the parties. This is the best I can do. There is no will right now to end this. So I'm doing the following. I'm leaving. I'm ending my relationship with the Kiev regime. And I think that's the best way to promote peace. Now, everyone in Washington will revolt against him, but they're irrelevant because the American population has no damn interest whatsoever in what happens in Ukraine. Wake up. Nobody here wants to go to war there. Forget it.
Right.
Yeah. And so something Zelensky said in this, I mean, he speaks nonsense all the time, but it's as if he thinks he has pull over what America does. And so he says, if Russia continues to drag out this war, then they will deserve it when Europe and America and the world act accordingly, including with further sanctions. So he thinks he's leading this. And he's like, I'm going to set my dogs on you, as if America's going to do what he says. He's such an incredibly dangerous little mole.
Well, he is dangerous because he's backed by most of the same people who are backing Netanyahu. And that's what you have to understand. He's not out there on his own. This globalist elite, it's a very, very powerful triangular relationship. You have the Western globalist elites, then you have Netanyahu, and you have Zelensky. They are all mutually reinforcing. There is, however, a difference. And the difference very clearly is that the populations are 100% opposed to marching east into Ukraine. And NATO is very, very fragile at this point, as is the EU. Those institutions are not going to survive this experience. I don't care what anybody says publicly. Behind the scenes, those are dead men walking. So frankly, if you're Putin right now, you thank everybody for their interest in peace. You compliment them and pay tribute to them and thank President Trump and all the efforts that he's making, and you send people out to talk, and you turn to the general staff and says, let me know when you're on the outskirts of Kiev.
Jeez.
Exactly.
Well, Colonel, we'll get you out of here on this. Last week, you heard from the Trump administration that if Putin doesn't come to the peace talks table, we're at massive sanctions, like crushing sanctions. Of course, we heard that under Biden, and Russia's GDP has increased. Their factories are humming along. They've moved further away from the U.S. dollar. They've aligned themselves with BRICS nations even more closely with China, et cetera. So those sanctions absolutely had the opposite effect.
But Trump talking shit, that's an act of war. Talking about crippling and crushing and brutalizing the Russian economy, hurting and starving and ruining people's lives. That's an act of war. See how Putin just laughed that off because, that's all you can do. It's talking about sanctions. You can't do nothing. You can't do nothing militarily. You see, you're a dying empire. That's your last, and that's why it is a BRICS. That's why they created that, because they're ending your tool on crippling economies and all that type of shit. See, that's the last thing the U.S. can do. No more bullying, nothing kinetic. You just lost to the Yemeni rebels.
And then we heard from J.D. Vance today on a gaggle on an Air Force plane saying, if Putin doesn't come to the table on this, or if we don't have peace talks, then we're ready to say goodbye. So what two things, how do you square those two things? Massive sanctions, number one, would those work against Putin and Russia? Number two, we're just going to walk away. Is that possible? The U.S. would just totally wash its hands and walk away?
Well, I think, first of all, you've answered your own question. No one in Russia is surprised by the sanctions threat. They're quite prepared for that. Remember, Putin just a few weeks ago spoke to the leaders of all the major industries and firms in the private sector in Russia and said it's time to come to terms with reality that these sanctions are never going to go away. The West is not going to finally wake up and turn back towards us and recognize that we're not the enemy. So we have to build bridges elsewhere. Those bridges are being built. It's called BRICS. And of course, you have the other supporting organizations like the Shanghai Cooperation Council and other entities, but they're all part of the same. Let's move away from the United States. Let's get out from under these people. Let's no longer be dependent upon them so that we can live in peace. In other words, in a very interesting way, the Chinese, the Russians, and the whole global South and everybody is practicing a form of containment towards us. We're seen as this rogue state, this unstable superpower that could lurch in the wrong direction at any given point in time. So what do? Well, you put as much distance between you and them as you can. And that includes reducing your economic dependency on them. So I think that's really what's going on. And I don't think anybody in Russia is terribly worried about the sanctions. And I know that President Trump continues to impute great importance to them, though I think privately he would like to get rid of them entirely. But you have something similar happening in the Middle East. And I think you need to understand that the Ukraine business is going to go away for the reasons we've already discussed. This war is going to end on Russia's terms. Vance is right. We'll just walk away because we can't do anything else. And eventually we will lift the sanctions. But in the meantime, we can't do that for fear of looking as though we've lost. Well, welcome to the real world. We lost a long time ago in Ukraine, and we've lost badly in Europe. It's not going to be a nice withdrawal from Europe. The years ahead, it's going to be ugly. And our position in that part of the world is going to be terrible. But when you go to the other pole in this triangular relationship, Mr. Netanyahu, that's a very different set of circumstances because Zelensky commands very little influence on the Hill. He is given tacit support, but Mr. Netanyahu commands far more influence in the Senate and the House than President Trump does. So
obviously, we saw that. Sorry, I was going to say we saw that over the weekend with all the Israeli anniversary celebrations. It was cacophonous. Sorry.
No, you're dead right, Natalie, and people need to take that seriously. They need to understand that when it comes to anything of importance to Israel, Mr. Netanyahu is the de facto president, not Trump.
100%. Yeah. I've long been saying that here on the show, and people get angry with me when we say the real president of the United States. But, you know, that's the case.
Sometimes I maintain this illusion when I see the things that President Trump does because he built so many bridges last week in the Middle East. And it was incredibly encouraging that Israel was not leading him to do those things. And in fact, they weren't in Israel.
Incredibly encouraging that man was building bridges with Al-Qaeda. See, they got to get their shit together. Building bridges with the head choppers in Syria. That's nonsense. Backstab to our veterans, our soldiers. We ain't gonna let Trump get away with that. That is just disgusting. And he got a $500 million plane from some old head choppers in Qatar too. Get out of here.
Israel's interest. And then he comes home and the first thing he does is an anti-Semitism message on the White House X account. And I think maybe there's a play here that I just can't see, that he's, trying to be nice in order to back us out of this. And I don't know how that would work. This is just my blind faith at this point. So do you have any?
Yeah, and Natalie, you're on to something that's very important. He was in the Middle East last week for the purpose of doing several things. Number one, he wants to try and coax the Emirates as well as Saudi Arabia into not joining BRICS. Well, that's not going to happen. Mm-hmm. And the money and the investment that he's talking about, he wants to keep it in the United States, what they've already got here, and he would like to add to it because of our very fragile position in the finance markets. The 10-year bond yield continues to rise. And the worst thing that could happen to him and to, frankly, our economy would be for those Saudis and Emirates to suddenly pull their cash completely out of the United States. If they were to do that, we would be in a lot of trouble. For that matter, the Chinese, the Japanese, and the others, if they do the same thing, we've really had it financially. That's how bad the situation is for us right now. But then there's one other last part that doesn't get much attention. And that is that President Trump is also working very hard to hold together this Turkish-Israeli pact for hegemony over the region. Everyone was upset when he shook hands with Giuliani. Well, shaking hands with Giuliani was necessary for him to hold Erdogan inside this alliance with Israel. And when I say alliance, that's probably the wrong word. It's more like a non-aggression pact between the Nazis and the Soviets. And he wants to keep that together because that's the linchpin for hegemony for them and for, in his mind.
Revolutionary salute to our brother James White for the donation to the war chest. Revolution is a way of life. Absolutely appreciate the love, family. Salute to you.
And for our continued influence. I think he's very wrong, and I think that will ultimately fall apart. And I think we can already see the outlines of that collapse coming. And that's going to be very ugly, because then Israel will absolutely stand completely alone in the region. But that's something else that we probably can't prevent. But I think that's a big part of what he was trying to do. So while people think, oh, this must upset the Israelis because he promised to send the F-15 now to Turkey. He's made these kinds of promises before, and a month or two later, well, I guess we can't do that. So I don't know that everyone is taking all of that as seriously over there as the public is here. Remember, we have this expression, flash to bang time in the military. You see the guns flash, and then you count a certain number of seconds, and then you hear the explosion. And that tells you roughly the distance. Well, for President Trump, flash to bang time needs to be short and quick to get the most exposure and media support out of it as he can extract. I think he did that this week, but I don't think it's going to last.
All right, Colonel. Well, we'll keep watching.
Watching jokes and live it up here or something. I mean, can't we?
I know. I was like, I didn't like any of that, but I need to hear it. I didn't come here to be told what I like.
Yeah,
so.
the truth, a realist. You know, because you get all these people, you get all these X accounts. They're like, this is the greatest thing in the world. And you know, you've been there. You've been inside the White House. You know exactly how this all works. And, you know, people need to understand the truth behind all of this. Colonel, great to see you as always. We'll be watching this very, very closely as always. Thanks, Colonel.
Thanks, folks.
Hi, everybody. Today is Monday, May 19th, 2025, and our friend Larry Johnson is back with us. Welcome back, Larry.
Great to be here.
Larry, we know that Donald Trump is going to talk with Vladimir Putin today.
They're talking right now.
They're talking right now. Yeah.
The call was supposed to take place at 10 a.m. Washington time. Initially, they said noon, but then Carolyn Levitt announced it would be at 10 a.m. So
it's in progress as we talk.
As we talk.
Yeah.
They're talking, we're talking.
Yeah, exactly. How, in your opinion, what are the main goals of Donald Trump in this talk? And from what we've seen in Istanbul, it doesn't seem that much of option on the table for Donald Trump. I would wonder what would be the main goal on his part right now, talking with Putin.
Well, Trump's delusional. That's the simplest thing I can say. He does not understand his own role in helping create this conflict. He added one country to NATO during his presidency. So he moved NATO east towards Russia, which is Russia's red line. They have, they put up for 26 years with the expansion of NATO to the east, despite multiple promises, not just from James Baker, but from other members of NATO at the time as well, like Genscher in Germany, that NATO would not expand to the east, and yet they broke that promise. So that's the root cause for Russia. But Trump keeps acting like, oh, the Russia and Ukraine are like two kids fighting. They just don't like each other. And I got to get in there and separate them. Give them time out, put them in their corners. I mean, it's crazy. He thinks, well, the Russians just hate the Ukrainians. No, they don't. And that's what, Trump sees this very much as like a personal thing between Vladimir Putin and Zelensky. It's not. And so, Trump right off the bat doesn't understand. So he's going to pressure, or thinks he's going to pressure Putin into ceasefire. And Putin's going to say, niet, no, not going to happen. There's not going to be a quote ceasefire. We will sit down and talk about the negotiations, but the first thing that must happen is Ukraine's got to vacate the 4 Russian provinces, because they are now Russia or Russian republics, are part of the Federation of Russian states. And if they don't do that, then we're not going to really have much more to talk about. But that's what's on the table. They may, what could come out of this talk today? Possibly they could agree to meet in person. Trump and Putin, but I think Putin's going to make it very clear to Donald Trump that what you're pushing for, this unilateral ceasefire, basically, it's not going to happen. Now, Trump was on the phone yesterday with Merz, Starmer, Macron, I believe Tusk of Poland, and Meloni of Italy. And so no readout as far as what was said on that call. But I'm sure they said, hey, you got to insist on a ceasefire. That's what is, and maybe he agreed to do that. But or maybe his goal was to tell them what he was going to say to Putin. But regardless, Trump's playing a very foolish game, because he's pretending as if the United States had no role at all in the buildup of the Ukrainian military, no role at all in bringing Ukraine as a de facto member of NATO, no role at all in targeting Russia. And and since he's been president, he's continued to allow weapons to flow. So I think I'll be very, very surprised if both sides come out happy. I suspect Trump's going to come out and condemn Putin as a problem, and Trump. The optimism, I held, it was, I didn't really believe it strongly, but I was hopeful that Trump would seize the opportunity to, one, end the war in Ukraine and reach a peace deal with Iran. None of that's going to happen. So Trump keeps saying some very, very stupid things with respect to what's going on in the world. He doesn't understand.
Here is, Larry, what former Defense Secretary Robert Gates suggested in terms of, he said that Donald Trump is not ready for a personal meeting with Vladimir Putin. And here is the reason he mentioned about it.
Trump not to take that face-to-face, even if Vladimir Putin was willing to do it?
I would say you need to figure out some leverage that you have going into that meeting with Putin. What can you do that puts more pressure to bear on Putin to make him believe his interests are served by not just a ceasefire, but basically at least freezing things in place?
What type of leverage?
Don't get me going on Bob Gates. I mean, look, he was the director of intelligence when I was an analyst. He's a liar. He is dishonest. He is a manipulator of intelligence. I witnessed it firsthand. One of my buddies was the South African analyst, a guy named John Reed, and John, the request came from the White House. We want to know if Nelson Mandela is a communist. And so John, wrote the response back, well, Nelson Mandela has relationships or friendships or associations with these different people who are communists. Nelson Mandela is not a communist. Bob Gates edited that piece. He only took out one little word. Let's see if you can guess what word he took out, Nima. Huh? You're muted.
He's not a communist. He's
Not. He took out not.
Just remove the not.
So Nelson Mandela is a communist. That's Bob Gates. Now, Gates is again delusional. Yeah, we got to find that leverage over Putin. We don't have leverage over Vladimir Putin, period. Those days are over. We're either going to agree to Russia's terms, which ultimately means NATO's got to back the hell off, or we're going to risk going to war with Russia. Because Russia's going to militarily destroy Ukraine and in the process eviscerate NATO. That's simple. People need to understand it. That's, if Putin sort of, if he's oh yeah, you're right, Mr. Trump. We'll stop where we are. We won't go any farther, and we'll trust you. The Russians they've been down that road already with us. They recognize you cannot trust the United States to keep any agreement. We've walked away from the anti-ballistic missile treaty agreement. Trump walked away from the intermediate nuclear forces agreement. Name one agreement that the United States has kept its word on. From the Russian perspective, that would be zero, none.
Larry, these people who are pushing for more leverage to be possessed by Donald Trump on Putin, here is one of the main goals of these people, and it seems that they're pushing so much from the U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Besson. Here is what he said.
To impose sanctions against Russia.
Well, I think we will see what happens when both sides get to the table. President Trump has made it very clear that if President Putin does not negotiate in good faith, that the United States will not hesitate to up the Russia sanctions along with our European partners. What I can tell you is the sanctions were very ineffective during the Biden administration because they kept them low because they were afraid of pushing up domestic oil prices.
Very quickly, how long for the timeline until you move to sanctions? Obviously, there's a call.
Larry, you see the same strategy in Yemen. They came to power and say, no, Joe Biden didn't fight the Yemenis the way that we are able to.
He was weak. He was weak. We're going to be tough. Oh.
I've now seen the same story.
Look, the United States and Russia share one thing in common. Both countries are rich in natural resources. Both countries are capable of feeding themselves without having to rely upon anyone on the outside. And both countries have all of the energy resources that they need to meet their domestic demand. But, the United States has opted to import some. But if you had to build a wall around each country and say which country would survive, Russia is the one that would survive. Russia doesn't need trade with other countries in order to stay alive. The United States does. The United States, in terms of its trade relations with Mexico, Canada, and China, we're really very dependent upon China for a lot of the consumer items. But when you look at the issue of debt, that is that's where it really starts to come apart for the United States. Russia's debt is about 14 to 20% of its gross domestic product. The United States debt is 125% of our gross domestic product, and it's getting worse with each passing day. People like Besson, they're just arrogant and and ignorant of Russia. They think, oh, all we got to do is really put Russia's economy's weak. Well, I started hearing that, and I started looking up some facts. In 1995, 7% of Russian citizens were considered in the middle class. Okay? That means you're looking at like 90% of the country in lower middle class, in some form of poverty. Today, that number is around 50%. Quite a dramatic turnaround in 30 years. In the United States, the number that were considered middle class in 1995 were around between 55 and 60%. Now that number's at 51%. So what's happening in the United States, instead of the middle class growing, instead of people becoming wealthier, it's going in reverse. And yet the United States continues to say, oh, we're the best. Oh, we're so much better than everybody else. Oh, yeah. Look at the literacy rates. In the United States, 54% of the population read at the 6th grade level or lower. Okay, our current literacy rate is like 74%. In Russia, it's 97%. So, start picking out markers in terms of which country can produce hypersonic weapons, hypersonic missiles that actually work in combat. Oh, that'd be Russia. The United States has yet to produce one. Russia's got at least 3. So the United States is indulging this fantasy of we're so good. It's like the evil queen was in Snow White, mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of them all? Just because you keep looking at yourself and you've told the mirror, you tell me I'm the fairest, so I'm going to break you. Okay, yeah, you're the fairest, you're the best. So, I mean, it's just, I actually say the relationship's not that complicated. It's pretty simple. The United States is locked in a delusional state. We believe things about ourselves that are just not true. And at the same time, we believe things about Russia that are not true. And those false beliefs lead us to make decisions that later, they blow up on us.
Do you think that in the it's so important, Larry, to put ourselves in the shoes of those people who are pushing for more leverage on the part of the West and Russia. But in your opinion, beyond sanctions, is there anything that comes to their mind that would be substantial for Russia?
No, well, they believe all we got to do is, prevent Russia from earning money off of oil and natural gas. And they assume that in that they're going to pressure India and China. In fact, I was just listening to Carolyn Levitt. She held a press conference this morning. It started a little after 9 a.m. on the East Coast. And she persists with this mythology of, oh, yeah, we put those tariffs on China and man, they came running. They came, boy, they were hurting. They came to us. It proves Donald Trump was right. Well, it's just nonsense. That's not what happened. It was the United States that called China. Hey, can we talk, please? I said, okay. What do we want to talk about? Oh, we'll cut that tariff back to 30%. And China said, okay, well, we'll do the same. We're going to treat you like you treat us. But I haven't seen anything in the press to show that China said, oh, and those bans we imposed on the rare earth minerals, we're lifting those. We're going to give those to you so you can build more weapons that you can attack us with. I didn't see China do that. And China is doing other things. They're, they used to send a lot of students to the United States, and those students paid a lot of money, making U.S. colleges profit. Chinese have pulled the plug on that. And so there are a lot of U.S. schools that are really suffering because they don't have those Chinese students around anymore. That's number one. which, and from just an intelligence standpoint, I maintain one of the reasons the United States did that over the years and encouraged the Chinese students to come was so CIA could actually identify, target, try to recruit people that would go back to China and become cooperators of the CIA. So now, we're busy making that impossible for the Chinese to come here too, in some respects. So it just, when you put this entire picture together, it's just, you've got a White House that's just out of touch with reality.
You mentioned China and India. We know that China is totally on board right now. You cannot separate China from Russia. But how about India? Even with the conflict between India and Pakistan, somehow the United States try to side with India. It seems that they're trying to do something with India, but the question would be how successful that would be to influence Russia, in your opinion.
Well, again, that's the story the White House is telling. I don't believe them. I don't believe a word of it. Other countries were intervening, trying to talk to both sides. Yes, the Chinese were trying to calm the Pakistanis down. The Russians are talking to Modi. But again, with China, go back 5-6 years, the relationships between China and India were tense. And, it was not seen as possible to have that settled. Well, along comes BRICS. Along comes the U.S. sanctions, where the United States is pressuring other countries. And all of a sudden, India and China find themselves sort of in the same boat, and recognizing that the United States is not a friend. The United States is a bully. The United States, we're like an abusive spouse. You're going to do what I say or I'm going to hit you. Hey, who wants to be in that kind of relationship? And particularly, Trump talked very tough about, he imposed sanctions on like 180 countries, including India. But and he said, oh yeah, those countries, they're coming, as he said, to kiss my ass. Well, they're not kissing his ass. People like, in the case of India didn't buckle. And then there were some threats being made about preventing India from building Apple phones. So, I think India, while it may have been inclined initially to maintain really good relations with the United States, they're keeping the U.S. more at arm's length now, because we're not a reliable partner. You saw that with Japan. Japan showed up in Washington last week, and the talk about the tariffs, and it's they said, what can you reduce the tariffs? And the United States reply was, tell us what you're willing to pay. And the Japanese said, we're not going to bargain with ourselves. You tell us what the deal is, and they walked away. So, the only big, beautiful deal Trump got was with the United Kingdom. What a joke. So, they operate, there really is a level of delusional fantasy on the part of the Trump administration right now, at least with respect to foreign policy and economic policy.
Have you ever figured out the sort of relationship, the way that the United States sees the two countries? We had a coup in Bangladesh recently, Larry, and we know how Bangladesh is important for India. And you see the conflict between Pakistan and India. What does the United States want? Somehow, I really believe before 2 years ago, 3 years ago, that the United States is in favor of Pakistan. because they wanted to do something with BRICS. But right now it seems somehow they're trying to manipulate that region. I don't know who's doing this, but
You
what
think,
is the main...
okay, you think they're just now trying to manipulate that region? I have a news flash for you. The United States has been meddling, conducting intelligence operations to destabilize and cause unrest there for 70 years, 75 years, since the start of the CIA. You know, the CIA's presence in the CIA has had a much closer relationship with Pakistan than with India, simply because we've used Pakistan as a military base for launching military operations in Afghanistan, first against the Soviets in the 1980s, and then later against the Taliban. We used it going back to 1959, 1960, when they set up the air base for the CIA to fly the U-2 mission over Soviet Union. So I can't rule out that Western intelligence, I believe Western intelligence was involved in the terrorist attack on that tourist site that took place on April 22nd in Kashmir. And it was done for one purpose, to stir up conflict between Pakistan and India. Now, the ones that came up with that idea, they didn't calculate on the possibility that both sides were willing to go nuclear. And when India reportedly hit the Pakistani bunker that stored nuclear weapons, that set off alarm bells. Now, I don't know if that was a lucky blow or they were deliberately targeting it, but you know, that sort of rattled everybody in the region. And I think particularly countries like Russia and China intervened, along with Iran. Iran does have some sway with Pakistan. So, but the United States, we're not a force for peace. We're not a force for promoting development. We say those things, but it's all about, we're going to create fights between people if it's necessary, just in order to make ourselves strong.
The problem, Larry, with the Trump administration is that whatever they're trying to do, it comes to the mainstream media. They're talking about it before talking with their counterparts, with the other party involved in that. Here is what Witkoff said about the direct talks today, as we talk between the two presidents, the president of the United States and Russia.
Unmatched. I think it's important. His sensibilities are that he's got to get on the phone with President Putin, and that is going to clear up some of the logjam and get us to the place that we need to get to. And I think it's going to be a very successful call.
What did you make of Putin's not going to Istanbul? I mean, President Trump even offered to adjust his trip to be there himself. Why was it, do you think, that Putin decided not to go?
Look, I don't want to comment on his motivations. I think in some respects it may have something to do with the delegation that he had sent to the original Istanbul talks, but those were different circumstances back then as compared to today. I want to leave it to, I want to be a bit more positive about this. I believe that the president is going to have a successful call with Vladimir Putin.
Now, in your opinion, what was the main reason of Vladimir Putin not going to Istanbul?
There was no
Was
reason.
there anything to talk about? Was there any sort of agreement between the two, I don't know, the two parties before to president? It doesn't seem to me that presidents would talk about the details of a deal, because that could be achieved by the teams that the two parties would provide, not by the presidents.
There was no reason for him to go. That was, manufactured by the West, trying to, create the narrative that Putin's the one who's the roadblock to peace. Putin on June 14th, 2024, laid out sort of 6 things that have to happen in order to be able to talk about a ceasefire. And the most critical one of those was the one that was reiterated again last week, that Ukraine's got to pull out of Zaporizhia, Kherson, Donetsk, and Luhansk. Notice the West was acting like, oh my God, how can they ask that? That's been on the table for a year now. I mean, coming up in June. It's not new, but the West is acting like, oh my God, this is new and outrageous. No, it's been his position. So that, pull out, stop the NATO supply of weapons, stop the NATO supply of intelligence, stop the war, and then we'll sit down and talk about a ceasefire, how we work this out. But Putin is not going to give back Kherson, Zaporizhia, Donetsk, or Luhansk. Ain't going back, nor is Crimea. And Zelensky can hold his breath and pound his fists on the table and jump up and down all he wants. It's not going to change that reality. And I think Witkoff is overly, he thinks, foolishly, that Donald Trump has some leverage over Putin. Trump has no leverage over Putin. Because, look, the fact is that if this war is not Putin's war. When you go back and listen to the speech that he gave on February 24th of 2022, when the special military operation started, he was very, very clear that this, Russia had tried through diplomacy, tried through talks to, basically get the West to back the hell off, stop coming after us. And the West wouldn't. And so Russia said, fine, we're taking this step. And, the initial military attack by Russia was simply designed to create pressure to get Ukraine to a negotiating table, which they did. And that culminated in the negotiations in Istanbul. Now, I know that John Helmer's on your show saying that the account that the West interfered and took that agreement off the table is nonsense. John is just dead ass wrong. Lavrov has repeatedly described what happened. And he said it again, it was either yesterday or day before yesterday at this foreign policy conference, that Russia, the agreement in principle that they signed off on was presented by Ukraine. Russia was willing to make one more deal with the Ukrainians, and it was the West that interfered with that. And at that point, Russia then had to change its strategy from using some military pressure to coerce negotiations, to make negotiations possible, to defeating Ukraine militarily. And that, the Russia was probably not fully prepared to do that, looking back now in June and July of 2022. But once they started the mobilization in September, and following the withdrawal from some areas like Kharkiv and Kherson, the Russian war machine geared up, and it's been an entirely one-sided affair since then. So Witkoff, I believe that is going to be a good positive call. Putin will be polite. He will be calm, but he's not going to surrender, agree to a ceasefire without the conditions that he's laid down being met. Because frankly, if he did something like that, I think the military in Russia and other key political allies would move against him, because he's already facing accusations of being too soft.
Larry, if we assume that the only option left for Donald Trump would be what's going on the battlefield. Is there any region on the battlefield in which Ukrainians are winning or somehow possess some sort of leverage on Russians?
No, zero. In fact, they've done the body exchanges of cadavers of dead soldiers. They did one in March, did one in April, and did another one in May. The bodies are being turned over at a rate for each dead Russian. The Ukrainians are getting 25 to 27 dead Ukrainians. A 1 to 27 death rate. That's called attrition. Now, some would argue, well, that's just because, Russia is advancing, and in the advance, Ukraine can't recover its casualties, and Russia can then pick its casualties up and move them to the rear. Okay, so you're admitting, if that's the case, you're admitting that Russia is advancing dramatically across the front, because they want to, oh, it's a stalemate. This war, it's a stalemate. No, it's not a stalemate. It's, Russia moving forward at its pace, destroying Ukrainian manpower, destroying Western supplied military equipment. And they're going to keep doing it until Ukraine surrenders or breaks.
Larry, the other part of the conflict is as you've mentioned, and in your response to my first question, is the case of Iran.
Mm-hmm.
And here is what Witkoff said about Iran.
With Iran, can you give us a sense of what is the outline of the deal that President Trump wants to get with Iran?
Well, the president has been very clear. He wants to solve this conflict diplomatically and with dialogue. And he's given all the signals. He's directly sent letters to the supreme leader. I have been dispatched to deliver that message as well, and I've delivered it. But on the other hand, we have one very, very clear red line, and that is enrichment. We cannot allow even 1% of an enrichment capability. We've delivered a proposal to the Iranians that we think addresses some of this without disrespecting them. And so that's important. We want to get to a solution here, and we think that we will be able to. But everything begins from our standpoint, John, with a deal that does not include enrichment. We cannot have that, because enrichment enables weaponization, and we will not allow a bomb to get here. But short of that, there are all kinds of ways for us to achieve our goals in this negotiation. We think that we will be meeting sometime this week in Europe, and we hope that it will lead to some real positivity. And that's where we are, sir.
Yeah, delusional. Iran's not going to go for that. Iran's made it very clear. We are a nation. We're entitled to do peaceful development of our nuclear energy. They have a signed agreement with Russia for that express purpose, which is Russia's in a position to guarantee that Iran will not enrich at a level to produce a nuclear weapon. So, like I said, Donald Trump had a chance to make a deal here, and he's going to walk away from this, and then he's going to have to say, okay, we're going to show those Iranians. And if he decides to launch an attack on Iran, Iran will defeat the attack. Iran will inflict significant damage on U.S. Military capabilities. They will destroy the Al Udeid Air Force Base in Qatar and probably shut down the supply of oil coming out of the Persian Gulf. That's going to help Iran tremendously. I mean, Russia tremendously with respect to, because all of a sudden the price of oil is going to go through the roof. Everyone's going to need Iranian oil or Russian oil. And, Iran's ability to inflict damage not only on the United States but on Israel. This, like I said, this can get out of control. Iran doesn't want that. Iran has been negotiating in good faith. It's the United States that's not negotiating in good faith. It's the United States, again, living in this fantasy world that we can tell everybody else what they got to do. They got to do what we say because we're in charge. And yet the Houthis said, nah, go ahead. You can stay out there.
Good night.
You can stay out there till our grandchildren are in charge. And the United States could not defeat the Houthis. We could not stop the Houthis from launching missiles into Israel. We could not stop the Houthis from preventing Israeli flagged ships or ships owned by Israelis from traveling to Israel. Couldn't do it. We had to pull out. And now we think we're going to take on Iran? Give me a break. It just, well, but, you know, when you've got somebody that's delusional, sometimes they got to get their nose, you know, they may think they're a championship prize fighter. It's only when they step in the ring and they get their nose broken that they realize, oh, maybe I'm not as tough as I thought it was.
And we know that the foreign minister of Iran has responded to what Witkoff said. That he said that we're gonna continue. We're gonna enrich uranium. Doesn't matter what the United States says about the deal. With or without the deal, we're gonna enrich uranium.
Right. Yeah.
Why do they need, Larry? The question is, why do they need to talk about it? Because this is what is one of the main points of the talks between the two parties. What do they need to talk about it on the mainstream media? Why not whatever they want to talk about? They can talk in their meetings. It's not a matter for the mainstream media to talk about.
Well, apparently Trump is under pressure. Reportedly, 72 senators, some large number have told the White House, under no circumstances can you cut a deal with Iran that will allow them to continue to enrich uranium. So, Trump is caught. He's politically in a difficult situation, and that may be one reason why he's talking about it. But again, this is an example where our political process is so broken in the United States that we're incapable of acting responsibly in the international environment. You go back to the whole Russiagate, the fabrication of the lie, the big lie push that Trump was beholden and under the control of the Russians, and the Russians were interfering in our election. That was created entirely to handcuff Trump and prevent him from having any kind of reasonable relationship with Russia during his first term as president. And, I talked to both Larry, Colonel Wilkerson, and to Doug McGregor. I did about a 50-minute discussion with Doug about his time working with the Trump administration to try to pinpoint, was Donald Trump not aware of what was going on with Ukraine during his administration? The fact that these military exercises were increasing, that the size of the Ukrainian army was being built up, that weapons, that there were the weapon supplies, the javelins, and then, the B-52s flying along the Crimea coast. And Doug said basically, no, Trump really was not aware. Trump wasn't calling the shots on that. So this is a sort of another example of how the deep state has its own agenda and is pursuing it, the intelligence and defense communities. And that Trump was misled, is, I guess, the best way to put it. He didn't understand what was going on. So, jump ahead now. Does he really fully understand, or are they, giving him the mushroom treatment, keep him in the dark and cover him with manure? you know.
Yeah, I think that could be the case because we know what has happened with the case of Syria. Donald Trump wanted to withdraw from Syria, but they increased the number of forces in Syria instead of reducing.
Mhm. Yeah. So you had actual people in the first administration that ignored his orders. In fact, that's Doug in our conversation goes through in great detail how Trump tried to get the withdrawal out of Afghanistan underway, and would have kept the U.S. force at Bagram, and even people like Kash Patel ignored his orders. So this is headed in a bad direction again. I was somewhat hopeful that Trump would seize the opportunity with Iran in particular, take Iran off the table, and then stop the murder of the Palestinian people. But Trump is the great enabler. He's shown some strength and personal courage in resisting the political attacks against him, the whole lawfare. But at the same time, he's a weak, insecure guy, and has found more reasons not to do the right thing than to do the right thing.
We thought that Witkoff would be someone different from the establishment, from the decision makers, those people who have been in the political system of the United States for many years. He's an outsider, but when you look at the way that for the case of Iran, he talked first, he said that we're going to accept enrichment to 3,461, 67, something like that.
Well, 3.6%, 3.7%.
Yeah. Then right now he's just changing his rhetoric, and I was wondering if he has some sort of agenda in the background of his mind by putting because he's not someone that has been in the political system and who knows how the system works, how the lies work. How can we understand that?
Well, no, he initially was agreeable to that, but then he got back to Washington, and all of the other players that have a say in this, from State Department, Marco Rubio, the Department of Defense, Pete Hegseth, but then key members of Congress, and they put out none, zero. But that's AIPAC. The AIPAC weighed in heavily. Called in everybody that's been taking money from it and said no, and hell no. So Witkoff had to bring his views around to conform to that. And I said, Israel is in the process of committing suicide, and unfortunately, it's taking a lot of Palestinians with it as it is dying. But it's not making itself stronger diplomatically or militarily, and it's really becoming more dependent on the United States. And at some point, this relationship between Israel and the United States, it's going to break, because the under 50 crowd, when they're looking at the signs of starvation, children starving to death, and the Israelis insisting those children are terrorists, it's heinous. It is the face of evil. And Israel has become the face of evil.
Here is, Larry, what Marco Rubio said about Israel.
Working on that on an hourly basis. It's something we're all very focused on and continue to be very supportive of. And I hope we'll have good news soon in that regard, but I think some impediments remain.
Are you asking Israel to slow down this military push? And the Qatari prime minister told Fox News that there was a deal being put together for all hostages or many hostages to be released after Idan Alexander, that American Israeli, was released recently. But then the Israeli military bombed a hospital, killing 70 civilians, and everything went sideways. Is that your understanding of what
Well, I would
happened?
say
It was
that-
this lack of care of collateral damage?
No, the way I would characterize it is that this war could end immediately, and Israel's made that clear. It could end immediately if Hamas surrenders and gives up their weapons and demilitarizes and releases all the hostages, including the deceased ones. If they did that, this conflict would end. That's been true from the very beginning. It's been true for months now. They're the ones that have chosen not to accept that offer. That said, we continue to work and do everything we can through diplomatic channels and private means to bring about an end to this conflict in a way that ends Hamas and provides the people of Gaza the opportunity at a prosperous and peaceful future. That also ensures Israel's security. So we're working on that. We've never stopped working on that. We've never stopped taking efforts to make that possible, and that continues. Even as I speak to you now, there are people working on that. So we're going to continue to do that, and that's the outcome we want to see, and hopefully the sooner the better.
Well,
Larry, if I were to define Marco Rubio, I would say he's the meaning, literally the meaning of nothing burger. And
Yeah.
he's just talking and offering nothing, just repeating the same sort of rhetoric that he has been doing for more than 3 months.
They're asking the Palestinians in Gaza to kill themselves. Yeah, have Hamas surrender, give up? No, I wouldn't advise Hamas to do that. Again, I went back through, the United States has gotten away and Israel's gotten away with labeling Hamas as this horrific terrorist group. And, they pushed the narrative that October 7th was, oh my God, this was the worst thing since the Holocaust. And you're going, okay, what? You claim in the Holocaust, 6 million Jews were executed. And now on October 7th, 1,255 die, which at least maybe 300 of those were killed by you, the Israelis yourselves. And you're saying that's the worst thing since the Holocaust? Can we be serious? I mean, when you get into a lie that's that despicable and dishonest, that you're not dealing with rational actors. So the facts are this: Israel has been unable to militarily defeat Hamas after 21 months of unconstrained warfare. They've killed tens of thousands. The Palestinian Authority reports close to 60,000 now dead. Others estimate that number could be in excess of 100,000, approaching 200,000. But we're talking about almost 2 million people, and they've been living under conditions that you can't even describe it as hell. Hell would be a vacation compared to what these people are experiencing. And the United States is in a position to stop it, and we won't. We keep enabling the Israelis, these Zionists, to do it. And in the process, the Zionists, they've destroyed the moral center of Israel. They've turned Israel into a monster. And the divisions within Israel on this point are growing. Notice that they talk about this Operation Gideon's Sword. I think that's what they want to call this latest offense to try to murder the Palestinians, clear out the northern half of Gaza. But they will only use regular army, the guys who are actually fully enlisted, not reservists, because they're worried that the reservists would not follow orders. Think about that.
Larry, do you think the Zionism in Israel, after all, is getting stronger, or somehow the population in Israel? Because it's not just about Gaza. We know that Israelis are somehow suffering from these attacks from Yemen. They don't have that sort of calmness in the country to go to the beach, to all the places that they want. they have to put some pressure on the government in Israel. And here comes the question, what do they want to be in the near future? Do they want to just murdering people, or do they want the government to be more rational, to do something that would benefit them in a long run?
Well, they're fractured. The society is fractured. You've probably got a majority, let's say 51, 55%, who are these, I don't want to call them they're not Haredi. They're not the ultra Orthodox, the ones that wear the side curls and the black hats and, dress up like male nuns. These are the settlers who insist that the Torah says that all of that land is theirs, and that anybody that lives there, Amalek, are to be destroyed, woman, child, man. And, they're a majority now. They reflect the extremist views that were once associated with Meir Kahane, this crazed rabbi that, saw no way to live with Palestinians. You've got, probably 35% of the population that are sort of the traditional Europeanized Jew, not religious, very secular, not guided by this notion that this is a biblical promise of this land, but wanting to have Israel as a nation. So that division exists, and unfortunately, I think even within that group, there's still a number that are unwilling to abide any kind of relationship with the Palestinians. That's why even before the Smotrich and Ben Gvirs took over, Israel for years was funneling money to Hamas in order to create Hamas as an alternative to the Palestinian Liberation Authority. And it was done entirely to sabotage any prospect of a legitimate peace deal being reached. So this, I don't see how Israel survives intact as a nation, because the population, people are leaving. They're not sticking around. And they're going to become more isolated in the world. The world's not lining up to say, oh, yeah, we think Israel's great. The greater the loss of life on the Palestinians and the starving to death, the greater will be the international pressure on Israel. They could be booted out of the United Nations as one possibility.
Getting back, Larry, to the case of Iran and the United States, I don't know if you've noticed what Donald Trump said in his visit to the Middle East. For the first time, he said that we're going to reach a deal with Iran, or I'm not going to let them to sell any oil. Instead of saying that we're going to attack them, as he was talking about it before. To my mind, when he changed his rhetoric, it seems that he feels that he's not going to get a deal with Iran. Because when he goes to extreme to explain his position, we are going to attack Iran or we're going to get a deal.
Yeah,
we know that saying, a barking dog seldom bite. And that comes to my mind. But when he just goes that, no, we are not going to let them sell oil, and it seems that even in his mind that he's not there to make a deal with Iran. That's why they're changing their rhetoric on their part. Enrichment 3.6, and right now no enrichment in Iran. Then maybe push for ballistic missiles, all the defense system of Iran. Do you feel that they're on the path of just not reaching any sort of agreement with Iran?
Yeah, no, they're not serious. They're captive of the Israeli lobby, the Zionist lobby. AIPAC would not allow a deal to be made. And AIPAC's goal is to get the United States to carry out an attack on Iran. And, if the United States does that, it will really mark the end of Donald Trump's presidency, because he will violate, just like George H.W. Bush. I was around for that. Read my lips, no new taxes. And then he imposed taxes. Then came the election and people threw his ass out. And, he was the one that won the Gulf War against Iraq back then. I mean, they had a big parade in Washington, D.C., troops marching, everybody, yay, George H.W. Bush, you're great. He broke that promise, out. Trump has promised not to embroil us in needless foreign wars. And if he pursues this path with Iran, he's going to, of not negotiating in good faith and imposing unrealistic demands on Iran, it's going to blow up in his face.
Marco Rubio is pushing for snapback sanctions, that term that was mentioned in JCPOA.
Yeah.
It seems that in their mind, when I look at the snapback sanctions, it's about Europe. The United States is out of the contract. It's all about Europe, China, and Russia. I don't see China and Russia going against Iran.
Well,
Europe is not in a position that they were before during JCPOA. Europe is in a much weaker position right now, and I don't know why can they achieve with this sort of a strategy on the part of the United States with the term of snapback sanctions.
Well, when those snapback sanctions were negotiated as part of that, JCPOA in 2015, Iran was in a much, much weaker position, and you basically had even China and Russia united with the West on imposing those restrictions. That's not the case now. So China and Russia are now firmly on Iran's side, and Russia signed this comprehensive strategic agreement, security arrangement with Iran. Iran is actually, it's not embroiled in a war in Yemen like it was with, where the United States was using the war in Yemen as a way to go after Iran, pitching Iran versus Saudis. The Iranians have reconciled with the Saudis. Iran was bogged down in the war in Syria, trying to prevent ISIS from taking over the country. They're now no longer in that. So Iran's in a much better position, and militarily they're far stronger than they have ever been. And their air defense system is robust, and their missiles are quite capable of penetrating and defeating Israeli air defense systems. So, like I said, Trump is stupidly pursuing a conflict that is quite avoidable.
And Trump knows that.
He should know. He should know that. He should know that.
Here is what he said, by the way, Larry.
I asked one of the companies, I said, I want a lot of drones. And, in the case of Iran, they make a good drone, and they make them for $35,000, $40,000. So I said to this company, I want to see it. They came in 2 weeks later with a drone that cost $41 million. I said, that's not what I'm talking about, $41 million. I'm talking about something for $35,000, $40,000 where you send thousands of them up. And that's a great way. And they're very good, too, and fast and deadly. Horrible, actually. When you look at what's happening with Russia and Ukraine, the drone is killing tremendous numbers of people. You hide behind a tree and the drone comes down and it circles.
Yeah, he knows what he's talking about. He has the information and how. And I was wondering if he would use this sort of information in the process of decisions that he's making right now.
Well, you'd hope he would, but I see no signs of it. The fact that Witkoff out saying no enrichment whatsoever. Hey, Iran's going to say that's unacceptable. So if that's your position, no deal.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Larry, for being with us today. Great pleasure.
Yeah.
The talks held in Istanbul between the delegations of the United States, Russia, and Ukraine can safely be called a major diplomatic victory for Moscow. Recent events have once again demonstrated that Vladimir Putin is a skilled strategist, who thoughtfully and calmly considers his actions. As you remember, for all these days, the Kiev regime and its masters in the European Union and Britain have been demanding in an ultimatum form to introduce a 30-day ceasefire, in order to begin the negotiation process. At the same time, Moscow was well aware that Kiev and its European curators needed this 30-day truce to rest and strengthen the Ukrainian army, which is currently suffering a crushing defeat in all key directions of the front. Against this backdrop, the Western media began to expose Russia in a negative light, saying that Moscow allegedly does not want peace, and that Vladimir Putin is leading everyone by the nose. In this regard, Russian leader Vladimir Putin decided to play ahead of the curve. In particular, he directly addressed Ukraine and invited representatives of the Kiev regime to start the negotiation process without any conditions. At the same time, Vladimir Putin emphasized that these negotiations would continue the Istanbul talks of 2022, which were interrupted by the Kiev regime on the direct orders of its Western masters. And, as you can see, Vladimir Putin has achieved another diplomatic victory. The Kiev regime and its European masters had to agree to these negotiations without a 30-day ceasefire. Moreover, during these negotiations, the Russian delegation made it clear once again that a ceasefire in Ukraine would only occur if all of Moscow's conditions are accepted. In addition, Ukraine also had to agree to Moscow's proposals for the exchange of prisoners of war, according to the 1,000 to 1,000 formula. Furthermore, the parties also agreed to exchange the bodies of Ukrainian and Russian soldiers who fell in battle. And this is where things get interesting. Through the mediation of the International Committee of the Red Cross, the Ukrainian side received 910 bodies of Ukrainian soldiers who were found in the territories controlled by the Russian army, while Ukraine handed over to Moscow only 35 bodies of Russian soldiers. According to employees of the International Committee of the Red Cross, with each new exchange of bodies, the number of killed Ukrainian soldiers increases, while casualties among Russian soldiers are rapidly decreasing. My dear truth seekers, as you can see, even discounting the fact that the Russian army is advancing along the entire combat contact line, casualties among Russian soldiers are much lower than in the Ukrainian army. All of this indicates that the Ukrainian army is completely exhausted, and can no longer even organize an effective defense. As a result, the Ukrainian command is increasingly using the so-called meat assaults to somehow slow down the advance of Russian troops. Against this backdrop, the British newspaper The Guardian, which has never hidden its pro-Ukrainian views, bluntly stated that the negotiations that took place in Istanbul became a significant victory for Moscow. The Guardian claims that Russia not only rejected all the proposals put forward by Ukraine and Europe, but also demonstrated to the whole world the deplorable situation of the Ukrainian army on the battlefield. Indeed, Putin's confidence and calmness are largely explained by the fact that the Russian army completely dominates the battlefield. Currently, the situation has taken shape in such a way that Vladimir Putin can dictate his terms to everyone, including the United States. The fact is that Putin understands perfectly well that his army is stronger than ever, and can solve all the tasks set. Indeed, in the last week alone, the Russian army has established control over 6 fairly large settlements in Donbass. At the same time, over the past week, the losses of the Ukrainian army amounted to 9,800 soldiers, and 180 units of heavy equipment, including 25 tanks. Of course, this instills confidence in the Russian leader that all objectives set during the special military operation will be accomplished. Putin is well aware that if Ukraine and its Western masters do not accept Moscow's terms, then Russia will achieve all its goals solely with the help of its army. And judging by Putin's recent actions, it becomes clear that Russia is not counting on peace negotiations, and is preparing to resolve the Ukrainian issue solely through military force.
That's a fact.
So, while all the experts and analysts closely followed the negotiations in Istanbul, Vladimir Putin made a rather interesting and simultaneously shocking move for the West. In particular, he dismissed 69-year-old Army General Oleg Salyukov from his post as Commander-in-Chief of the Ground Forces and appointed the victorious young General Andrei Mordvichev in his place. My dear friends, let me remind you that General Andrei Mordvichev has not lost a single battle in his entire military career. At the same time, his talent as a commander is highly appreciated even by his enemies. This general was first mentioned in May 2022, after the liberation of such a large city as Mariupol. The fact is that during the battle for this city, General Mordvichev did the impossible. He managed to liberate this city with a ratio of forces of 1-to-1. Back then, many were shocked, especially considering the fact that according to military science, the attacking side should have at least a threefold superiority. Later, General Mordvichev also managed to liberate Avdiivka. It is noteworthy that the Ukrainian army and NATO forces have been preparing defensive positions in Avdiivka for 14 years. Avdiivka was rightfully considered the most heavily fortified city in the world. However, even this could not stop General Mordvichev and his army. Back then, the head of Chechnya, Ramzan Kadyrov, called General Mordvichev the best commander in the world. There is no doubt that Vladimir Putin appointed such a talented general to the position of commander of the ground forces for a reason. In particular, an authoritative military expert, Vlad Shurigin, said that Vladimir Putin is convinced that the Kiev regime will not accept Moscow's conditions, and will not voluntarily leave new Russian regions such as Kherson, Zaporizhia, Donetsk, and Lugansk. According to this military expert, the appointment of such a talented and victorious general as Andrei Mordvichev to the post of commander of the ground forces indicates that Vladimir Putin is preparing to solve the Ukrainian issue solely through military force. Moreover, Vlad Shurigin expressed his conviction that everything that is happening on the battlefield indicates that the Russian army is preparing to liberate not only the new territories that have become part of the Russian Federation, but also regions such as Kharkiv, Dnipropetrovsk, Nikolaev, and Odessa. By the way, during his recent interview, General Andrei Mordvichev made a statement that shocked the so-called European leaders. In particular, he said that Ukraine is only the beginning, since the main ideologues of this war are in the West. At the same time, General Mordvichev hinted that the current conflict will last long, since after Ukraine, Russia will still have to re-educate the whole of Eastern Europe.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Geopolitical Trends, where truth matters. Did you see this coming? In a move that has captured global attention, Colombia has officially joined China's expensive...
Now, Colombia joins China Belt and Road Initiative. Probably soon they'll probably try to join BRICS. I know Trump and the administration is going to wage war on Colombia. It's going to be a bunch of narco trying to assassinate politicians, drug wars, which lead to politicians getting killed in the crossfire, all of that over this.
Belt and Road Initiative, known as BRI, signaling a significant shift in its foreign policy and economic strategy. This decision not only redefines Colombia's bilateral relations, but also has broader implications for South America's geopolitical and economic landscape. Colombia's strategic alignment with the BRI. On May 14th, 2025, Colombian President Gustavo Petro met with the Chinese President Xi Jinping in Beijing to formalize Colombia's participation in the BRI. This partnership aims to enhance bilateral cooperation in infrastructure, trade, and technology. President Petro emphasized the potential of his alliance to transform historically marginalized regions like San Andreas and Buenaventura into hubs of technological innovation and economic growth. China now, Colombia's second largest trading partner, has expressed readiness to increase imports of high-quality Colombian products and, of course, support Chinese business investments in Colombia. Then you ask yourself, what are the economic opportunities and challenges? Well, Colombia's integration into the BRI presents opportunities for addressing its trade deficit with China, which stands at approximately $14 billion. The Colombian government anticipates that enhanced trade relations and Chinese investments will help bridge this gap, potentially improving the country's fiscal balance and debt repayment capacity. However, this move has raised concerns among Colombia's private sector, which fears that increased Chinese competition could adversely affect domestic industries. Critics argue that the influx of Chinese goods and services might undermine local businesses and lead to job losses. What about the geopolitical implications in Latin America, one might ask? Colombia's decision to join the BRI, the Belt and Road Initiative, reflects a broader trend in Latin America, where countries are increasingly engaging with China to diversify their economic partnerships. This shift has elicited apprehension from the United States, traditionally the dominant external actor in the region. In response, the United States has expressed opposition to Chinese projects in Colombia, particularly those involving state-owned enterprises, citing regional security concerns. Notably, the U.S. has opposed funding from institutions like the Inter-American Development Bank for Chinese-led infrastructure projects in Colombia, such as Bogota Metro Line 2. Despite U.S. objections, Colombia's alignments with the BRI underscores a desire among Latin American nations to pursue more autonomous development path, free from traditional Western conditionalities. The BRI offers an alternative model of cooperation, emphasizing infrastructure developments and economic integration without the stringent requirements often associated with Western aid. Then something comes to mind: copper, which is a strategic commodity in the BRI context. The BRI's focus on infrastructure developments is poised to increase global demand for copper, a critical component in construction, electrical grids, and renewable energy technologies, among others. Latin America, particularly Chile and Peru, plays a pivotal role in the global copper supply chain, accounting for a significant share of production. Colombia, while not a major copper producer, has untapped potential in this sector, with several projects under exploration. China's engagement with Latin American countries through the BRI could facilitate investments in Colombia's mining sector, potentially transforming the country, Colombia that is, into a more prominent player in the copper market. This development would align with China's strategic interests in securing stable supplies of essential raw materials for the industrial and technological advancements. Here is my conclusion for you. Colombia's accession to China's Belt and Road initiatives mark a significant realignment in its international relations, with potential benefits in infrastructure developments, trade diversification, and technological advancements. However, the strategic pivot also presents challenges, including domestic industry concerns and geopolitical tensions with traditional allies like the United States. As Colombia navigates this new partnership, its expertise will offer valuable insights into the evolving dynamics of global economic integration and regional development strategies. Now, I want to really talk to you about an extraordinarily important topic, and that is how the United States of America is currently making sure that its national security isn't compromised, or at least they are trying. As you know, there are many moving parts, from trade to the dollar, and my focus is on materials, the bedrock of our economy. Without them, the United States will find it hard to compete with China. That's why President Trump has signed several executive orders to protect copper production and mining on U.S. soil. Copper is often called the new oil. It is at the heart of America's future, and I could not be more bullish about it, especially when it is coupled with gold. Copper demand is surging, while supply struggles to keep pace. On a scale of 1 to 10, I am a full 10 on domestic U.S. copper production. Now, here is where basic and common sense supply and demand come into my bullish thesis. Global mine production is expected to peak in 2026, with a projected 700,000 tons deficit in 2025 alone. Underinvestments in a new mine has created a supply crunch. Like I said before, this is the time to get bullish and inquisitive on this sector, in addition to other metals. The US-China trade war has disrupted global copper supply chains. China, which controls 50% of global smelting, faces export challenges. Trump's investigation into copper imports aimed at bolstering national security is the leading edge in a worldwide revolution in mining. I want us to truly grasp the scope of the opportunity with copper mining on U.S. soil. This is precisely what the administration thinks about copper. Let me share some quotes with you. For example, the U.S. Secretary of Commerce, Howard William Lutnick, said, and I quote, "American industries depend on copper, and it should be made in America. No exemptions, no exceptions," end of quote. Mr. Trump himself said, and I quote, "I have also imposed a 25% tariff on foreign aluminum, copper, lumber, and steel, because if we don't have it, we don't have a military. And frankly, we won't have. We just won't have a country very long," end of quote. Trump has also said, and I quote, "Copper should be made in America. It's time for copper to come home," end of quote. The world is hungry for copper. This leads me to talk about the sponsor of today's video, Giant Mining, stock ticker BFGFF. Check it out. Not only does it own a copper, silver, gold project in Nevada, but it also recorded its best ever drill intercepts in September 2024, with additional great results in the past few weeks. This company is the only copper company I am bullish on right now. On February 14th of this year, Executive Order 14213 was issued and implicitly prioritized copper as a critical resource. Nevada, where Giant Mining Copper Project is situated, has constantly ranked among the top mining jurisdictions in the world, which is why I am bringing this company to your attention. Giant Mining's balance sheet is now fully funded for its drilling programs in 2025. Giant Mining is well positioned to accelerate its exploration efforts and potentially capitalize on emerging copper markets opportunities. This is great news in my view. The share price is down by about 50% since early February, due to, of course, market turmoil. So I am highlighting the company to you today for a reason. Giant Mining, once again, US stock ticker is BFGFF, owns the Majuba Hill Copper Project. This is a fast-producing mine. In the past 4 years, management and the company's geologists have actually expanded the copper deposits. And this past September, Giant Mining hit their best ever drill hole. Historic underground mines at the Majuba Hill project produced copper, tin, and silver from the early 1900s all the way to 1950s. And it includes the following: 2.8 million pounds of copper, 185,000 ounces of silver, 5,800 ounces of gold, and 21,000 pounds of tin. I will say this again. All of these factors and the following ones below are and the ones that led to my significant bullish opinion about Giant Mining. The infrastructure is ready due to the following: access roads, power supply, transportation, water supply, ore stockpile, and processing plant. Do your homework on Giant Mining, stock ticker BFGFF. As always, remember,
the Pentagon has a perfect record in all of its war games against China. We lose every time.
The United States recently made, actually, Pete Hegseth, a state visit to the Philippines. And what's interesting about the Philippines is that there's a lot of talk about Taiwan from the Filipino government, as well as the United States. Here is Taiwan news. There is a Super Bowl, they're calling it, of joint U.S. drills with the Philippines called Balikatan 2025. Here is the report of this massive military exercise.
The U.S. and the Philippines have begun their annual joint military drills amid tensions with China. The head of the Philippine Armed Forces spoke at the opening ceremony for the exercises called Balikatan, or shoulder to shoulder.
These initiatives are not solely about demonstrating power. They epitomize partnership in action, dedicated to safeguarding people, preserving peace, and preparing for future challenges.
More than 14,000 Filipino and American soldiers are taking part in this year's Balikatan exercises around the Philippines. The drills come amid increasing confrontations between Beijing and Manila in the South China Sea over their competing territorial claims. Other countries, including Australia and Japan, will also take part in the exercises.
Massive drills, Brian. But not only this, the U.S. has deployed a ship killer missile near Taiwan. It has deployed the anti-ship missiles to the Luzon Strait near Taiwan for the first time as part of annual military drills designed to prevent naval invasions. The Navy Marine Expeditionary Ship Interdiction Systems, NMESIS, are being airlifted to multiple islands in the Philippines' Batanes Island chain, less than 120 miles from southern Taiwan, Naval News has reported. Described as ship killers, they are ground-based missile launchers designed to strike against ships at distances of over 115 miles. So, Brian, these are major escalations. What have you made of this U.S. buildup toward war, especially amid this trade war, which has most people's attention at this time?
Well, what did I say? I said the Biden administration transformed the Marine Corps and by extension the U.S. Navy into an anti-shipping force, and that was all done under his presidency. And now you have the Trump administration making use of that. So absolute uninterrupted continuity of agenda. That is exactly what the force was built and designed for, and that is exactly how President Trump is seamlessly fits into his form. What a coincidence. And I'm wondering how long until these Filipino military commanders, so excited about standing shoulder to shoulder with the U.S., their former colonial masters. The U.S. literally colonized the Philippines. They only got their independence, supposedly, after World War II. How long until he has an American flag on his shoulder instead of a Philippine flag? What has been done to the Philippines is such a tragedy. It is a country with a much larger population than Thailand, but a much smaller GDP, precisely because the U.S. has been playing these games with the Philippines, fashioning it into a Ukraine of Southeast Asia, if you will, and for Washington's benefit, completely, absolutely at the expense of the Philippines. Before this, the Philippines, for a very short period of time under President Duterte, they were greatly cooperating with China. China was actually in the process of building desperately needed modern infrastructure across the Philippines. And then since Marcos was installed into power, politically captured by the US, those projects were literally canceled. And instead they took public funding and they are using it to build up missile bases with missiles designed to point at China. China is the Philippines' largest export market and source of imports. So they are pointing missiles at their most important trade partner, their best chance at modernizing their nation and catching up and actually developing. And instead, they're allowing themselves to be subordinated by the United States because of the US's ability to politically capture and control a targeted nation. So we all heard about how Trump dismantled the NED and USAID and Voice of America. Nonsense. All of that has been consolidated under the State Department. The tools have been streamlined and sharpened, and they're still being put to use. And the Philippines is a perfect example of this in action. And they're trying to do it across the rest of Southeast Asia. And again, like I said, if they could have their way, they would make every nation in Southeast Asia another Philippines. They have all these countries spiraling into poverty while taking what resources they do have and putting it into U.S. weapons to point at China. China, which is lifting all of these other nations out of poverty and helping them develop at accelerated rates. So it is an absolute tragedy for the Philippines, and it represents, I would say, an existential threat to the entire region. Because any one of these countries collapsing and being used as a proxy by the U.S. threatens peace and stability and prosperity for everyone else in the region, and I would say even all around the globe.
This is happening right now. It is preparations for a literal war with China, Brian. Talk about that connection, because a lot of people don't understand, like, why Taiwan? Because even Balikatan, these military exercises have at their heart Taiwan. You heard the report about the anti-ship missiles. That is about the Philippines and getting close to the Philippines in order to supposedly protect Taiwan from China. So why Taiwan, Brian? Because it appears to be that the war that the U.S. is really preparing for in the South China Sea and the Asia Pacific is about centering Taiwan. And we know about all the war games that even Pete Hegseth, what did he say? The U.S. loses all these war games, but yet they keep war gaming.
Yes, and you know the reason why is because the U.S. doesn't necessarily need to win an all-out military conflict with China. All they need is to create a large enough pretext to justify a global maritime blockade against Chinese shipping. That's what I believe. That is what the goal is. That is what it has said in policy papers spanning decades now. There are papers from the early 2000s that talked about cutting off Chinese maritime shipping, preventing China from being able to protect its civilian shipping around the globe. And the U.S. does have this advantage right now, and they are rushing to use it while it lasts. It's not going to last forever. The U.S. military spans the globe. We always talk about the hundreds of bases they have all around the globe. Their Navy sails all around the globe. The Chinese military is incapable of projecting military power anywhere close to the same level the U.S. has. It's essentially, and U.S. policy papers admit this, while the politicians lie to the world and say China is a military threat to the world, they brag about how China's military is confined to defending China and China alone. They're upset about China militarizing the South China Sea because they understand that what was that in reaction to? What is going on in the South China Sea? There are two things going on in the South China Sea. Number one, maritime shipping. And who is that maritime shipping between? China and all of its trade partners in the region. Just like the Philippines, almost every other country in the region counts China as their largest trade partner. So is the U.S. in the Philippines to help the Philippines protect their maritime shipping with China from China in the South China Sea? Doesn't make any sense. There are these maritime disputes. These maritime disputes have always been going on. It's nothing new. And it's not just with China. Philippines has maritime disputes with Malaysia and Indonesia and Vietnam, and they get very heated. But otherwise, these very localized, heated disputes, all of these countries have very good, I would even say friendly relations with one another. They trade with one another. Their leadership visit each other as if nothing is going on. And because these maritime disputes always happen and it's always kept well under control, the U.S. has inserted itself into these disputes, and exclusively only if the dispute involves China, and they're trying to escalate it into a regional or even global conflict. They can justify militarizing the region with their own military and building up this confrontation with China. Now, Taiwan specifically, it helps for people to understand. A lot of people have this misconception because the Western media, conservative, liberal, doesn't matter, in concert, they lie to the public about the status of Taiwan. Taiwan is part of China. Every country that does business with China observes a one China policy. One China means there's one China, Taiwan is part of China, and there's only one government of China, the People's Republic of China, based in Beijing. And if you read the Shanghai Communique from the 1970s, the US agreement with China, they say not only do they recognize that everyone on both sides of the strait count Taiwan as part of China, they don't challenge that position. So a lot of people try to leave out that last bit and say, well, they recognize that they believe that, but they themselves don't believe that. No, they said in the communique, they don't challenge that. So they agreed to that. But ever since then, unofficially, they've been undermining China's sovereignty over Taiwan by selling it military weapons, by encouraging separatist political parties that the U.S. funds and is maneuvered and keeps in power, by co-opting, capturing, polluting their information space with separatist ideology, and by beginning to place U.S. troops on Taiwan itself. So during the first Trump administration, the U.S. began putting troops there. By right, China, that is an act of war. China could have started a war with the U.S. right then and there, but they didn't. They're being patient. They're showing restraint. If it was the other way around, if it was China putting Chinese troops on Catalina Island off of California's coast, it would have been war. It would have been instant war. So it shows you who is the troublemaker and why. Why are they so obsessed with Taiwan? Again, not just to deny, not just to complicate and raise the cost for China, to extend China in the same way they're extending Russia in Ukraine. Not just to deny them this source of the semiconductor industry on Taiwan, which makes a huge amount of business with the rest of China and imports raw materials from China necessary to keep that industry going, by the way. But also, again, like I said, this is you look at the conflict in Ukraine vis-a-vis Russia and how the U.S. used that as a pretext to coerce the rest of the world to completely cut off all ties with Russia, cut all trade, place sanctions on them. The U.S. literally blew up pipelines to prevent Russia from sending energy to Europe. This is what they want to do with China. And they need something drastic to serve as a catalyst for imposing these harsh restrictions, to enforce this isolation of China in ways the tariffs are attempting to at least prime the way for. A conflict would actually seal the deal. So this is what it is. It's a combination of reasons, and these are among the primary reasons.
Well, it's interesting, Brian. You have major admirals, generals, those who have a relationship, either a continued relationship in the Indo-Pacific Command or a former relationship, and they say something very different to you that also reveals just how important this war with China is and how much panic that they are trying to engender in order to escalate it. Here is the National Interest, which is an establishment media outlet. China escalated military exercises around Taiwan in 2024. Admiral Samuel Paparo, if you know Samuel Paparo, he is a China hawk, a champion in the Indo-Pacific Command. This is what he had to say. China continues to prepare for an invasion of Taiwan, top military officer in the region told lawmakers. In 2024, China's military increased its activity around Taiwan 3 times. The Communist Party of China maintains its claim over the small neighbor and continues to prepare for forceful reunification. Quote, Beijing's aggressive maneuvers around Taiwan are not just exercises, they are dress rehearsals for forced unification, said Navy Admiral Samuel Paparo, who is now the commander of the Indo-Pacific Command. He said escalated military pressure is up 300%. 3 military drills, of course, as opposed to 1. Last year, I stated this balance of power in the Indo-Pacific was shifting in China's favor. Since then, the Communist Party of China, this is why I brought this up, because it has to do with the Philippines, has significantly increased its coercive activity toward Taiwan and the Philippines. So they're tied together. So, Brian, they are sounding the alarm for forced reunification. That is what China is doing, supposedly. But what is China actually doing? Because I think that there's a deeper story here behind not only why China is increasing its military activity and spending, but also what it might be doing to engender the ire of the United States.
I mean, Taiwan is part of China, so China is entitled to do whatever it wants in and around the islands. And they have showed tremendous restraint and patience regarding the status of Taiwan and solely because of U.S. interference. People are always saying, no, Taiwan is independent. They have the right to be independent. There's nothing that takes place on that island that isn't determined in and for Washington. People have to keep that in mind. Just like we were talking about the regime in Ukraine, Israel, all of these proxies of the U.S. will not continue existing without constant and substantial U.S. support. And Taiwan is no exception to that. So if left alone, if the U.S. just left the status quo where Taiwan has this status because of circumstances of history, eventually it would have reunified with China. It may already have reunified with the rest of China because economically, the economy on the island of Taiwan is so dependent on the rest of China. If you look at where they export and import from, it is mostly from the rest of China. And in ways, the United States could never replace. There is no alternative for the rest of China. So just that alone, plus China has all of these laws and measures put in place to make it exceptionally easy for people living in Taiwan to also go to the mainland, and not just go to the mainland and live in the mainland, but to do business on the mainland. And so a lot of business owners in Taiwan do a lot of business with the rest of China. And so if you just left that way, reunification was a sure thing. So the U.S. is betting on separatism to delay it and raise the cost for unification. If not trying to stop it, at least raise the cost significantly. But as it turns out, China's military capabilities in and around Taiwan, its own island province, are growing to such an extent, its military is modernized to such an extent that the threat of U.S. military force is becoming more and more manageable. So as each year goes by, all of the advantages the U.S. had in regards to maintaining Taiwan as a pressure point against the rest of China is diminishing. And so this is the US struggling to maintain this leverage. And again, it's why is it involved? People have to ask themselves, why is the US involved with Taiwan at all in the first place? It is on the other side of the planet. It is right off the coast of the rest of China. It is on the other side of the Pacific Ocean from the United States. How is it America's business? It isn't. And if it was the other way around, no American would tolerate it. And yet in the mind of so many Americans, because of how effective American propaganda is, they somehow think that this is not just acceptable, but absolutely necessary. It's amazing. And this demonstrates the danger of propaganda and the importance of participating in, I guess you would say, this information warfare.
Yes. And, when it comes to U.S. military aggression toward China, Brian, there's this connection to what really is a decline of the U.S.'s primacy, as you call it. We could call it its hegemony. We could call it its overall, we could just call it a declining empire, so to speak. But the United States is facing a global crisis that it itself has made, where it is becoming more and more isolated on the world stage because of the dynamics of its own system. And this is what's happening. When we talk about a trade war, what we're really talking about is not a war at all. China has essentially, quote unquote, won this war by doing nothing related to war. It has built robust relationships with countries around the world that are complementary, focusing on its development, kicking the U.S.'s behind in essentially all areas of tech development and infrastructure development. And here's what's happened. In 2000, the United States used to be the world's leading trading partner of the vast majority of countries around the world. There you see in red the countries that China in 2000 was the number one trade partner of. In the blue is the U.S. Now look at 2024. Most of the world, if not the whole world, outside of Canada, Mexico, parts of Latin America, and Western Europe, are trading with China as their number one partner. So this is a dramatic change on the world stage. It includes the Belt and Road Initiative. It includes all these multilateral mechanisms. And also, Brian, it includes what a lot of people are bringing up in my audience. They're saying, what about this technological revolutions that China is undergoing? Thorium, we're on and on and on, just making innovations and advancements that the United States doesn't have capacity over. Actually, the United States is sanctioning and tariffing these innovations. For example, like electric vehicles, becoming the world leader of car production generally, but electric vehicle production wholly, to the point where the U.S., before Trump, tariffed, I should say, electric vehicles in China 100%, essentially decoupling in order to prevent competition, which the U.S. isn't even really waging. There is no competition. So, Brian, your reaction to kind of these root causes, as to take the words of Russia and Putin, Lavrov, they always talk about root causes. Well, the root causes of this conflict with China, your thoughts?
America's desire to dominate, its inability to accept another nation, especially a non-white nation, from surpassing it. And if you look at this logically, by the way, Daddy, you showed that map, and you see all of the red all across Eurasia, and especially Southeast Asia, and where the South China Sea is located. So does anybody actually believe that the U.S. Navy is in the South China Sea to protect the freedom of navigation of ships that are all almost certainly engaged in trade? The one below, 2024. Does anyone think the U.S. is in the South China Sea?
I'm just pointing at where the South China Sea is. This is what we are talking about. We're talking about this long area that, yes, extends outward. All the countries are top trading partners with China.
Yeah, so the reason the U.S. Navy is actually there is to threaten it, and if possible, disrupt and stop it. And again, this is in all of their policy papers. If they could just create a war big enough, short of nuclear war, but a war big enough, maybe a year, a 2-year war, whatever, they don't even care how it ends, just as long as they can create hostilities in the region, convince shipping companies to just avoid the whole area, China, essentially. They could basically blockade China and collapse its economy. And so that's what it's about. And Danny, you're talking about technology. Yes, this is all because of technology. The collective West has this ingrained belief that they are inherently superior to everyone else on Earth. They are inherently superior to Africa, Latin America, Asians. They're all inferior, subhuman, depending on who you talk to. And in reality, the West enjoyed the benefits of historical circumstances. The Industrial Revolution began in the West, and they benefited from that. And there was tremendous technological and thus economic and military disparity because of that. But as time went on, from the World Wars through the Cold War up till now, technology has proliferated. And it turns out that people in China are just as capable of understanding, using, and even advancing technology in ways the collective West now is incapable of because of the systemic factors in China that allow it to surpass the US in terms of research, development, and innovation. The fact that they're graduating more STEM graduates every year, for example. Infrastructure is another example. It turns out that the rest of the world is just as capable of using technology and creating tremendous power. Now, what are the deciding factors? It's not the West and their military and their technology, because now everyone has the technology. Everyone has the ability to produce weapons that they can use to defend themselves. What is now the deciding factor? The deciding factor is whether you as a nation are investing in the human resources within your nation. That is the most important resource, is the human resource. Are you educating them? Are you taking care of their health with universal health care? Are you providing them housing? Are they struggling to survive, or are they able to work and innovate and contribute to the building of society? And in China, the answer is yes. In the United States, the answer is absolutely not. And it gets worse and worse each year. And it doesn't even have to be this way. The United States could be rational and accept its place in the world. It is 4% of the global population. It could accept a proportional role within the rest of the world among other nations rather than imposing itself on all other nations. All of this is a consequence of the US refusing to accept that reality and insisting that it's still somehow inherently superior, no matter how much evidence adds up to the contrary. And so this is why we're at the verge of all of this war. This is why there is instability. This is what is impeding, not propelling, human progress at this point. The West has become the greatest obstruction to human progress right now on planet Earth. And the most ironic part about all of this, you have people like J.D. Vance. Oh my God, I'm a Christian. I'm such a big Christian. And Donald J. Trump, we're all Christians. I don't know if people understand this.
Remember when Rubio had the cross?
The Ash Wednesday cross on his forehead. You know, really, literally wearing his religion on his skin. Pete Hegseth also this Crusader cross.
Right.
What is the most important virtue of Christianity that all other Christian virtues are built on? Humility. And that is the one thing no one will ever accuse anyone in the US government, all of these so-called Christians, of being is humble, having any sense of humility. And if they did, they would open the door to the progress and the greatness of America that they're always promising, but in actuality, having no intention of ever making good on. And so that's the ultimate irony there, that if they actually were Christians and upheld humility, they would see their proportional place in the world, you know, in God's creation. They would stop pursuing dominance over everyone else. Yeah, I remember Jesus talking so much about dominating everyone around you. That's such a reoccurring theme in the New Testament, right?
Absurd, yeah.
So if they actually adhered to that, America would look completely different. And the irony is they're always accusing China of being so godless. But if you talk to Chinese people, they're some of the most humble people on earth. And people in Asia in general have this ingrained sense of humility and sense of collective responsibility. Like there's individualism, but there's also this greater sense of collectivism where you're playing a role in a greater group. We're human beings. We're a social species. You cannot deny this as a factor of evolution. We're a social species, and we have to work together to accomplish anything. And people in Asia seem to get that, and people in the collective West at one point did actually understand this. I mean, when you look at the United States when it was at its strongest, there was strong collectivism and individualism combined. That's all gone. And it's because of this blind pursuit of power and profit has blinded them to even reality. If you don't know what's going on in reality, you cannot plan properly. You cannot put a plan together that makes sense and is achievable or sustainable. And this is what we're seeing the consequences of. And because the US has so much momentum, power and wealth and momentum, it is so dangerous because these people who are blind, they're basically driving a giant bus into a crowd of people. I mean, you could kind of compare it to that. They're blind and they're driving a bus, a huge multi-ton vehicle speeding into a crowd, and they're not even looking at where they're going. This is US foreign policy.
Yeah, and I want to just play now for your reaction to it, exactly what Pete Hegseth said before he took the official position, before he was started his tenure as Secretary of Defense. Here's what he said about war games with China.
The Pentagon is in the book, the exact amount of years, but in the past X number of years, 10, 12, 15, the Pentagon has a perfect record in all of its war games against China. We lose every time inside the Pentagon war games. We know what our real capability. You see, we didn't even get to this part of the war on warriors. I mean, the military-industrial complex, the way we procure weapon systems, we're always, the way our system works, the way our bureaucratic system works, where the speed of weapons procurement works, we're always a decade behind in fighting the last war. Whereas China, we have what did Rumsfeld say? You go to the war with the army you have. We have the army. China's building an army specifically dedicated to defeating the United States of America. That is their strategic outset. Take hypersonic missiles. So if our whole power projection platform is aircraft carriers and the ability to project power that way strategically around the globe, and yeah, we have a nuclear triad and all of that, but a big part of it. And if 15 hypersonic missiles can take out our 10 aircraft carriers in the first 20 minutes of a conflict, what does that look like?
Yeah.
I mean, and if they've already got us by the balls economically, which you pointed out very well with our grid.
This is not the Pete Hegseth we've been seeing as Secretary of State, as Secretary of Defense. But your thoughts about this, because I mean he speaks some truths here, but overall, your assessment of the United States' way of war toward China.
Yeah, well, he's admitting all of this, but if you listen to the whole interview, it's kind of funny because he's talking about how evil China is because it's central planning and it's communist. And what his conclusion is basically we need to adopt all of that whole system so that we catch up and compete with China militarily. And he's talking about how the Chinese military is designed to defeat the United States. But is that true? Is it? And in what way? He's talking about aircraft carriers. Is China talking about using hypersonic missiles to sink American aircraft carriers at port in the United States off the East Coast? No, he's talking about defeating America off of China's shores. What is the United States military doing off of China's shores in the first place? So he's admitting that America is the hostile aggressor and China seeks to defend itself against this hostile aggressor. Makes perfect sense to any rational person who sheds their bias and just looks at this rationally and what is going on. And wouldn't the United States do the exact same thing? The United States military is not designed to defend the United States. It's designed, and they even say this, to defend American interests. And what is an American interest? Things in other people's countries that don't belong to America, but that America wants. That's what American interests are outside of America's own borders. And so he's, if you listen carefully, you can hear him admitting to all of this. And I bet he doesn't even understand what he's actually laying out there. And I don't think it was because a lot of people noticed all the bottles of alcohol in the background. I don't think it's just because of that. I think he and people like him are just so blinded by their own sense of unwarranted sense of superiority that they can't see reality for what it is. So yes, and so again, I don't think America's military is designed or capable of defeating China militarily off of China's own shores. I don't think that that's the case. I think what they're looking at is how can they use these capabilities in a way that China cannot counter, and that would add up to the global maritime blockade. And they say in their policy papers, we can blockade China, in the Indian Ocean, at the Panama Canal, Greenland, all of these places where China cannot project military power. And we don't need to fight and win any sort of armed conflict in Asia Pacific itself. We just need to create hostilities that deter shipping from moving through these waters. And I don't think that they would be beneath or above. I don't think they would be above sinking, targeting civilian maritime shipping to deter it. And look at what's going on in the Black Sea, for example, the use of these maritime drones by Ukraine to attack Russian vessels. So that's what they're talking about. And they've got companies working on maritime drones specifically for this purpose. So this is the threat China faces. This is why they've invested so much in the Belt and Road Initiative. This has been in policy papers for decades now. So China is well aware of this and reacting to it, responding to it. And people like Pete Hegseth see that and they think, how dare China defend itself against our attempt to encircle, contain, and subordinate them? They should be subordinated to us because we are inherently superior. They're inferior. We will not accept non-white nations surpassing not just America, but the collective West. But that is what is happening. And what happens when you have people with that immovable mentality coming into contact with immovable reality? Chaos, disaster.
Yeah.
And Russian nuclear-capable bombers conducted a joint patrol over the Sea of Japan on Friday.
Ns and 6 H6Ks. The H6N is making its debut. China designed it as a long-distance strategic bomber. It can conduct aerial refueling.
You've heard about kamikaze and AI-powered drones that can cause chaos in the enemy's territory, and fighter jets and aircraft that can drop missiles like it's raining hellfire. Now, what if we told you that there's a single Chinese aircraft in the sky right now that could cripple an entire U.S. Navy carrier group with just one mission? Hello, and welcome back to your favorite channel's Race to Space, where we talk about military and strategic developments across the world. In today's video, we're diving deep into one of the most terrifying pieces of hardware in China's airborne arsenal. This flying hellraiser is a massive death message that can wipe out an entire fleet in existence. Although known for some time, this ferocious beast in the skies is one of the primary sources of destruction in the China's People's Liberation Army Air Force's fleet. Yes, we are talking about the one and only H-6N strategic bomber aircraft. One thing that is famous about this bomber plane is that this is a bomber that doesn't just fly, it actually haunts its enemies for years. It is a bomber that doesn't just threaten, it promises devastation and delivers it effortlessly. Not just another lumbering sky whale from the cold era, this is a long-range missile-launching Leviathan that brings chaos from the skies. A plane armed and fueled mid-air is ready to turn the enemy's Navy fleet into a sea graveyard. With the H-6N, it's most likely that China is giving a broad message to the world. Your ships may be powerful, but they're not safe, not anymore. To understand how far China has come, we need to take a quick look back. The H-6N is not a new name, but a rebirth. It's a direct evolution of the H-6 family, a series of bombers originally derived from the Soviet Tu-16 Badger. While the early models were dated and basic, the H-6N is a beast of a completely different breed. It's faster, stronger, smarter, and above all, strategically devastating. Unveiled publicly for the first time during China's 70th anniversary military parade in 2019, the H-6N represented a quantum leap in aerial strike capabilities. But it wasn't until the following years, particularly in 2024, that it became clear. This aircraft isn't just a national symbol, It's a war-fighting machine designed to eliminate high-value naval targets from thousands of kilometers away. Unlike its predecessors, the H-6N comes with a built-in probe for aerial refueling. This changes everything. It turns what was once a regionally confined aircraft into a long-range precision tool capable of global reach. And why is that so important? Because now Chinese bombers don't need to hug the coastline. They can fly deep into the Western Pacific, reach the Indian Ocean, or even approach the Hawaiian defense perimeter without ever landing to refuel. In tactical terms, this means U.S. carrier groups are now well within range, no matter how far out they operate. Just imagine this. A U.S. Navy fleet is on patrol thousands of miles from mainland China, thinking it's out of reach. And then, out of nowhere, radar pings incoming fast movers. They're H-6Ns, refueled and armed to the teeth, ready to deliver a skyborne storm straight into the heart of a billion-dollar fleet. Now, range alone doesn't make a bomber deadly. It's what the H-6N carries that gives it nightmare fuel status. This upgraded aircraft is the first in the H-6 family capable of deploying air-launched ballistic missiles, ALBMs. And not just any missiles. These are long-range, high-speed, precision-guided ballistic killers. Think of them as carrier killers, anti-ship missiles that are launched from the air but hit like ground-based ballistic rockets. Once launched, they arc into the stratosphere, reach hypersonic speeds, and descend almost vertically toward their target, making them extremely difficult to detect and nearly impossible to intercept. In fact, our expert analysts speculate that one of the missiles fitted under the belly of the H-6N could be the DF-21D, or even the air-launched variant of the DF-26. These aren't just missiles, they're fleet-wiping weapons. Just one strike on a U.S. aircraft carrier could send shockwaves throughout global naval strategy. Let that sink in. The H-6N can fly undetected, get refueled midair, and then launch a missile capable of sinking the most heavily defended ships on Earth. That's no longer just an air platform. That's strategic dominance in motion. China's strategic mindset is clear: deny the enemy access to critical areas, especially in the Indo-Pacific. The H-6N plays a starring role in that strategy. It's a platform not just for brute force bombing, but for psychological warfare. It tells rivals, wherever you go, we can find you and strike you. Now, in case you're wondering, yes, the H-6N is equipped for more than just one role. It can carry multiple types of payloads: cruise missiles, anti-ship ballistic missiles, standoff munitions, and even nuclear-tipped warheads. It is as flexible as it is frightening. In real-world scenarios, that means it can be deployed for 1. Preemptive long-range strikes, 2. Fleet interdiction, 3. Strategic deterrence missions, 4. Precision standoff attacks, 5. Nuclear delivery. So whether it's a regional flare-up in the South China Sea or a full-blown Pacific showdown, the H-6N will always be in the front row, ready to strike and able to disappear just as quickly. For decades, the U.S. Navy has been the uncontested master of the seas, operating massive aircraft carrier groups with impunity. But not anymore. With the H-6N in service, the days of safe offshore superiority are rapidly fading. Pentagon analysts are particularly concerned about one chilling reality. If a conflict were to break out near Taiwan or the South China Sea, China wouldn't need a large-scale naval engagement to take out U.S. ships. A small wave of H-6Ns, refueled, guided by satellites, and armed with hypersonic ALBMs, could decapitate a fleet from hundreds of miles away. No direct naval clash, just a skyfall of pinpoint strikes. This radically alters the rules of engagement. U.S. Navy commanders now need to factor in strategic air threats that can reach them before they're even within firing range. And with China's rapidly advancing radar jamming and electronic warfare systems, even detecting the H-6N before it launches could become an increasingly difficult task. However, let us say this: the introduction of the H-6N is just one piece of a much larger puzzle. China is building a new generation of long-range strike platforms, stealth fighters, hypersonic missiles, and smart drones, all forming a multi-layered aerial assault doctrine. But in this grand design, the H-6N acts as the hammer, a force multiplier capable of leveling battlefields from the sky. And let's not forget, This bomber is already operational. It's not a prototype. It's not a concept. The H-6N is actively being deployed and integrated into the People's Liberation Army Air Force as we speak. This shows China is not preparing for tomorrow's war. It's already ready for today's war. So what can we say about the H-6N? Let us remind you that it's not just an aircraft. It's a revolution in Chinese strike capability. It is a flying Leviathan armed with the
just entered a new phase, and China's J-35A is leading the charge. This isn't just another stealth fighter. It's engineered to hunt and neutralize enemy stealth jets before they even know they're spotted. Built for kill chain integration, the J-35A can detect, track, and guide weapons to destroy advanced threats like the F-35 or B-21. In this video, we break down what makes the J-35A so dangerous and why it could shift the global air power balance. The J-35A is not merely an evolution in Chinese stealth aviation. It's a deliberate, high-stakes leap into modern kill chain warfare. Developed by AVC Shenyang and unveiled at the 2024 Zhuhai Air Show, this twin-engine fifth-generation fighter is optimized specifically to counter high-level threats such as stealth aircraft and low-observable cruise missiles. According to aircraft designer Wang Youqing, the J-35A will serve as the backbone of the PLAF, central to China's aerial response framework. But what gives the J-35A its true edge is its integration into PLAF kill chains, a series of coordinated steps from detection to target neutralization. The J-35A can detect adversarial stealth threats, lock onto them, and relay precise targeting data to other units, including ground-based air defenses like surface-to-air missile systems. It can even use its radar to guide other weapons, enabling long-range missile engagements far beyond visual range. This functionality doesn't just multiply its lethality, it transforms the jet into a command and control node in the sky. Unlike the J-20, which is geared toward air dominance and long-range engagement, the J-35A is envisioned as a more versatile and integrated force multiplier. Comparable in design heritage to the earlier J-31/FC-31 Gerfalcon, but now tailored for domestic deployment rather than export. The J-35's low price and scalable production potential, as stated by Wang, suggests that the PLAF intends to deploy it in considerable numbers. The threat matrix it's built to counter isn't theoretical. The USA, UK, and Japan are rapidly developing sixth-generation stealth fighters under programs like the Boeing F-47, B-21 Raider bomber, and the Global Combat Air Program, GCAP. These platforms are designed to penetrate the kind of layered defenses China is building, and China knows it. As Wang bluntly explained, if hostile stealth assets manage to breach outer defenses, they could detect and destroy Chinese systems from hundreds of kilometers away, far before conventional radars pick them up. The J-35A is designed to prevent that exact scenario, ensuring Chinese defenses can see, track, and counter these threats before they reach critical range. But in the era of fifth and sixth generation warfare, the ability to detect stealth is becoming just as crucial. The J-35A steps directly into that role, equipped with an advanced suite of sensors, radar systems, and AI-powered data fusion that allows it to act not only as a ghost, but as a stealth hunter. The J-35's airframe benefits from next-gen shaping techniques and radar-absorbent materials refined from the J-31/FC-31 lineage. These technologies significantly reduce its radar cross-section, RCS, giving it the capability to approach high-threat environments undetected. But stealth is no longer enough. The strategic value of the J-35A lies in its ability to detect and track other low-observable platforms, even those flying at extreme distances or high altitudes. Wang Youqing's public statements make it clear, this aircraft is tailored to confront adversaries with significant stealth advantages. That means aircraft like the F-35, F-22, and emerging sixth-generation fighters must now contend with a Chinese aircraft that's purpose-built to find them. The J-35's onboard systems can conduct sensor fusion, compiling information from radar, infrared search and track, RSD, and electronic signals to build a real-time picture of the battle space. Once a target is tracked, the jet can either engage directly or hand off tracking data to other systems in the kill chain. This multi-layered detection strategy is vital because modern adversaries, particularly the US and NATO, are developing stealth platforms designed for deep penetration of air defenses. The B-21 Raider and GCAP 6th-gen fighters are not just stealthy, they're data-driven, autonomous-enabled, and designed to operate in swarms. The J-35A is China's answer to that future threat environment, acting as both forward scout and active combatant. And unlike legacy stealth platforms, which often operate in isolation to protect their low observability, the J-35A is intended to function as part of a cooperative combat ecosystem. It can illuminate and track threats without compromising its own position, leveraging passive sensors and offboard data inputs. Ultimately, the J-35A turns the stealth paradigm on its head. It's not just about avoiding detection, it's about denying invisibility to the enemy. The J-35A is more than a leap in air combat technology, it's a declaration of strategic scalability. China's vision isn't just to build a better fighter jet, but to mass-produce it, integrate it across air and naval forces, and establish a new standard for regional air superiority. Wang Yaoqing confirmed that the J-35A can be produced affordably and in large numbers, thanks to advances in modular assembly and the reuse of design elements from the earlier J-31. This mass deployment capability contrasts sharply with Western stealth fighters like the F-22, whose limited production made them exclusive but logistically difficult to sustain. The J-35A, by contrast, is intended to become a workhorse of the PLAF, playing a frontline role across inland bases and possibly on naval carriers in the future. Its carrier variant, the J-35, is already being adapted for deployment aboard China's Type 003 Fujin-class supercarrier, reflecting a shift in China's military-industrial strategy toward joint operations and blue water projection. While many initially assumed the J-35A might be developed with exports in mind, like the FC-31 was marketed earlier, China daily reports clarify that this aircraft is not meant for export. This internal focus underscores its strategic value to China's defense priorities, not as a commercial asset, but as a domestic counterweight to Western stealth platforms. This large-scale deployment strategy dovetails with Beijing's geopolitical posture. As tensions escalate in the Indo-Pacific, especially around Taiwan and the South China Sea, China aims to saturate these areas with capable, networked jets that can rapidly respond to stealth incursions, provide continuous surveillance, and coordinate with air and missile defense systems. The ripple effect is global. Nations like the US, Japan, the UK, and Australia are pouring resources into next-gen stealth and unmanned platforms to maintain their edge. The J-35A forces them to reconsider their own force compositions, particularly regarding counter-stealth detection and multi-domain integration. In short, the J-35A is not a niche prototype. It's a scalable, battlefield-ready answer to tomorrow's stealth threat, and one that could dramatically shift the balance in any high-tech aerial conflict of the near future. The J-35A isn't just another stealth fighter, it's a warning shot. With its ability to detect and destroy even the most elusive enemy aircraft, it's redefining the rules of air combat. China is no longer playing catch-up, it's setting the pace. As global powers race towards sixth-generation warfare, the J-35A proves one thing loud and clear: the skies of the future won't just be about who disappears first, but who sees through the shadows and strikes faster. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more updates on space exploration.
We are going to be looking at some disturbing videos, strange and odd news stories, and as always, let's go ahead and get right into today's video. We definitely have quite a few things to talk about in today's video. Quite a few things happened over this weekend. But before we go ahead and talk about that, I'm really starting to feel like a lot of these stories that we're hearing coming from the news, they're intended to make a path for AI. That their purpose is to make us feel that humans are not needed, they're obsolete, and that they're more of a risk factor than an actual computer. And randomly, just out of the blue, this story just happens to pop up. Now, I'm the plane guy. Everybody knows me, or most people that are subscribed to this channel anyway, knows me as Minutes of Planes because I always covered plane stories. And not once did I hear about this story. I definitely would have covered this story because it happened back in February of 2024. And like I said, we're just hearing about this now. Reading this article from the New York Post, which was published on May 17th, yesterday, this article is titled 200 plane passengers fly without pilot for a frightening 10 minutes after co-pilot collapses in cockpit. So I told my wife about this story yesterday, and instantly she felt like something did not sit right with her about this story. Matter of fact, multiple people in the comment section of this article also feel the exact same way. The pilot, he gets up, he goes to the bathroom, and then instantly his co-pilot just happens to faint. Continuing to read the article, it says a Lufthansa plane carrying nearly 200 passengers went a frightening 10 minutes without a pilot after the first officer lost consciousness in the cockpit while the captain was off using the bathroom, a probe has found. The mid-air saga unfolded when the Airbus A321, carrying 199 passengers and 6 crew members, was en route from Frankfurt, Germany to Seville, Spain in February of last year, according to a report put out by Spanish aviation investigators this week. So again, we're just now hearing about this week. But anyway, the 43-year-old captain, who wasn't named in the report, said he left the first officer, 38, alone with about 30 minutes of flight time remaining so he could pop to the lavatory, noting that his second in command appeared to be able and alert at the time. But listen to this, because this is where things get even more bizarre. The article continues to say, but when he returned roughly 8 minutes later, the pilot said he was unable to access the flight deck despite entering the security door's access code 5 times. So it sounds like we have a couple of issues here. Not only did the co-pilot faint or pass out, but the pilot could not access the door with his code. So the pilot, he kept trying to use his access code. It wasn't working. Eventually, an intercom call went to the flight deck and it went unanswered. This is when the pilot started to panic. He used an emergency code to access the door. He went in, and all of a sudden, as soon as the door opened, the co-pilot came to. He awakened. What? But it seems like the emergency code wasn't working either, because the article continues to say, before the emergency access code timer expired, the co-pilot opened the flight deck door manually from the inside, the report stated, adding the captain quickly took control of the plane. So if the timer was still going down for the emergency access code, that means the code that the pilot was putting in, the backup code, the emergency code, again, was also not working. So what's going on here? The article goes on to say, as the co-pilot was pale, sweating, and moving strangely, the captain called for assistance from the cabin crew. The co-pilot was given first aid by the crew and a doctor who was traveling as a passenger and diagnosed a possible heart condition. Isn't that interesting? It seems like a lot of pilots and co-pilots are having issues with their heart these days. I just wonder why. But that's for another theory into itself. The article continues to say, in the aftermath, the co-pilot told authorities he didn't know how long he was out for. The co-pilot stated that he had lost consciousness and that he couldn't remember when. Before that, he remembered flying over Zaragoza, and the next thing, he was being attended to by the cabin crew and a doctor, the report said. The loss of consciousness was so sudden that he was unable to warn the other crew members of his incapacitation. But they also want to remind us that the aircraft was to continue flying in a stable manner due to the active autopilot function, the report said. So again, I mean, it really does come off like humans are not needed. They're a risk factor. The plane was able to safely make it to its destination in a very stable manner, thanks to AI. And it goes on to say, the article ends with, during that time, though the voice recorder recorded strange noises in the cockpit that were consistent with an acute health emergency, according to investigators. It has come out, though, this co-pilot, he went to the hospital. He suffered with a neurological condition, which led to a seizure. But this whole story is very bizarre. And it really comes off like a fake story. The pilot, he gets up to go to the bathroom. The co-pilot faints. The pilot comes back. None of his access codes are working. Not even the backup code is working. The emergency timer is going down. And then all of a sudden, at the last minute, at the buzzer beater, the co-pilot wakes up and he's able to open the door. No, I'm not buying it. They purposefully made this story extra scary because almost everybody knows that for the most part, for the majority of the flight, planes basically fly themselves until they begin to land. And that's when the pilot takes over. Now, what would have happened if this co-pilot was unable to open the door or he passed away? And because the pilot could not access this door. So with only 30 minutes left, and as the plane had to land, it would seem like almost everybody would have lost their lives on this plane because nobody could access the flight deck to land the plane. And it seems like this story is now going to be a part of a much bigger narrative or a much bigger story to make a case for planes basically taking off and landing themselves, the computer doing all the work. And if that's the case, what's the need for a human pilot? I mean, we're even getting news coming out that Texas and Arizona, they are now introducing autonomous semi-truck drivers, semi-trucks that drive themselves. And they say if it works out, they're going to introduce it all across the United States and perhaps the world. So I would not take something like this off the table, complete autonomous planes, because nothing about this plane story adds up. And when that happens, usually there's an agenda behind it. And if you've not realized, when it comes to almost all of these plane stories that are coming out, a lot of these crashes or these planes colliding into one another, they're happening as either the plane is taking off or as the plane is landing, the time where the human pilot basically takes over from the computer. But it seems like nothing's adding up about any of these stories. And it seems like ever since Barack Obama's scripted movie came out, Leave the World Behind, we're just hearing about ship crash after ship crash after ship crash crashing into bridges. And if you remember, Barack Obama's scripted movie, Leave the World Behind, started with a ship crashing into the beach. Really, think about it. Have we really heard of this many ships and barges crashing into bridges of this frequency prior to this movie? It was the ship crashing into the beach which set off all the chain of events in Leave the World Behind. And everyone that did a breakdown, including myself, of the movie noted the important symbolism behind the name of the ship called the White Lion. Reading this here, it goes on to say, in Leave the World Behind, the White Lion is a large oil tanker that runs aground on the beach, serving as a symbolic omen of impending doom and a reference to the ship that brought the first African slaves to America in 1619. The White Line's grounding signals the beginning of a larger, more terrifying event, a nationwide power failure, which sets the stage for the film's apocalyptic turn. So again, not only was the ship's name symbolic, but it also symboled the terrifying doom that was coming to the United States. Then a few months later, at the beginning of 2024, after we all witnessed the scene in Leave the World Behind, we get a ship colliding into the Francis Scott Key Bridge. Of course, Francis Scott Key being the writer of the Star-Spangled Banner, the United States national anthem. So you can't make it up. You can't make it up even if you tried. And then after that, we were getting news stories left and right of barges and ships colliding into bridges. And yesterday, we had another symbolic ship crash with the Cuauhtémoc Mexican Navy training ship colliding into the Brooklyn Bridge. The ship had 277 people on board, and a lot of them were actually standing on the mast, which they normally do. The Navy, they'll stand on the mast as they're entering or departing a pier, and this ship actually just left the Manhattan Pier when it lost power. This ship was very similar to these other stories of these barges and ships colliding into bridges, because this ship, as it departed the Manhattan Pier and was supposed to be heading out to sea for whatever reason, it started to drift towards the bridge, and that's when it collided into the bridge. The NYPD Special Operations Chief pointed to some mechanical issues that likely preceded the crash, but officials emphasized that the information was preliminary. Here's something I don't understand as well, and I'm reading this article from USA Today. It's titled, Mexican Ship Was Headed the Wrong Way Before Crashing into the Brooklyn Bridge. And my thing is, isn't there a way for these ships to be manually guided into the same direction without it turning the opposite way completely and crashing into a bridge? This ship, which had supposedly lost power, was still illuminated, meaning it has some kind of backup system going. And reading this article here, it says, yes, a ship with a mast, and this ship had multiple masts, can still be guided even if it loses power. Though it will depend on the type of ship and the specific circumstances, large vessels, particularly those with multiple masts, will often have systems like emergency generators or backup steering systems that allow them to maintain some level of control and maneuverability. So you mean to tell me that this ship that clearly had a backup system going and multiple masts had zero control to the point that it went into the opposite direction, crashing directly into the Brooklyn Bridge? This part of the article says the Potomac was supposed to head south out of the New York harbor and onto Iceland, but it went to the wrong direction and sailed under the bridge. Okay. They go on to say it was unclear what caused the ship to veer off course. New York Police Department Special Operations Chief again said the ship had just left a Manhattan pier and was supposed to have been headed out to sea, not toward the bridge. This is weird. It's just such a weird story. The Potomac is a sailing ship. I could see if it was something like Royal Caribbean or the MSC, but again, it's a sailing ship with multiple masts, and for whatever reason, it just started heading in the opposite direction. Maybe I'm overthinking it, but it's just a weird story. I don't know. What is even more interesting is that exactly 1 month before this ship crashed into the Brooklyn Bridge, this news story came out where New Jersey and New York, they were reassessing their bridges to see the likelihood of a ship crashing into one of their bridges, including the Brooklyn Bridge.
It's a really alarming thing to wake up to this morning, Craig and Vanessa. 15 bridges in our area, including the George Washington Bridge, are on those lists that urgently need to be investigated and evaluated for their risks. Let me give you a look at the rest of them. In addition to the George Washington Bridge, we're also talking about the Verrazano, Bayonne, Goethals and Outer Bridge, along with the Brooklyn, Manhattan, and Williamsburg bridges. The investigation into the collapse of the Francis Scott Key Bridge nearly a year ago in Baltimore, yielding now an urgent call that 68 bridges go through safety evaluations for similar catastrophic crashes. The massive container ship from Singapore lost power and the ability to steer, causing it to crash into the supports of the bridge that killed 7 people. Even more damning, the owners of the bridge had been previously warned to do a safety evaluation, but failed to do it. And now it will take an estimated 4 years for this bridge to be rebuilt.
Had they ran the calculation on the Francis Scott Key Bridge, the MDTA would have been aware that the bridge was almost 30 times greater than the risk threshold AASHTO sets for critical essential bridges. What's frustrating is not only did MDTA fail to conduct the vulnerability assessment on the Key Bridge, they did not provide, nor were they able to provide, the NTSB with the data needed to conduct the assessment, including the characteristics of vessel traffic passing under the bridge, vessel transit speeds, vessel loading characteristics, waterway and navigable channel geometry, water depths.
So the naming of the 68 bridges on this report does not mean that they are in imminent danger of being struck and collapsing, but that an investigation finding each of these bridge owners should do a thorough investigation using these safety standards to assess if a strike is more likely due to the type of boat traffic that passes underneath them and other factors. Now, the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey responded to all of this, saying in part of its bridges that they hold the crossings to the highest safety standards with industry-leading protection systems in place. Container ships like the Dolly do not pass under the Outer Bridge crossing, Goethals or George Washington bridges, and the vessels that do pass underneath are a third of the tonnage and 400 feet shorter than the Dolly. They went on to say that additionally, multiple tugboats are used to maneuver these vessels around our bridges here, and also that if they were in a situation like this, they would actually strike ground before they would strike the bridge, trying to allay fears that something like that could happen here. We're live at the George Washington Bridge. I'm Kirsten Cole, Pix 11 News. Back to you, Vanessa and Craig.
There was a very bizarre story that happened last year in April involving the Verrazano Bridge in New York that not many people talk about, which they should. Reading this article here from Action 6 News, huge cargo ship loses power near New York Bridge, incident reminiscent of what led to Baltimore collapse. And again, they're referring to this huge cargo ship that crashed into the Verrazano Bridge. But a few weeks after that had happened on April 30th, the cargo ship crashing into the Verrazano Bridge happened on April 7th of 2024. But on April 30th of 2024, there was an article that came out, multiple articles, and they were titled, "What Would Happen If Verrazano Bridge Was Hit by a Ship? Polls 1 Simulation to Find Out." What? What is weird about this article is that even though the Verrazano Bridge was hit by a ship earlier that month, this article makes no mention of that. Continue to read the article. It says, officials on Staten Island are calling for a computer-generated simulation to see what would happen if the Verrazano Narrows Bridge was struck by a cargo ship similar to the tragedy that brought down the Francis Scott Key Bridge in Baltimore. And the article goes on to say that Monday, Borough President Vito Fossella, along with State Senator Jessica Scarello-Spanton, toured the harbor with the Coast Guard to understand the likelihood of a catastrophic event happening to the span. Like, take a look at what this article continues to say and tell me, is this not suspicious? The article continues to say, after the terrible situation in Baltimore, I think a lot of folks legitimately asked, what if something like that happened here? Or could something like that happen here? And every elected official reacted in kind, and we've been planning this trip since then, said Fossella. Basically, we tried to understand and see if anything that happened in Baltimore could be prevented from happening here. But the thing is, this article came out on April 30th, and we were told that a large cargo ship ran into the Verrazano Bridge on April 7th. So what's going on here? So they ran a simulation, a what if a ship would crash into the Verrazano Bridge, a few weeks after a ship had actually crashed into the Verrazano Bridge, and yet there's no mention of this ship crashing into the Verrazano Bridge. It's just weird. The article goes on to say, according to Fossella, New York has more advantages than Baltimore because there are more tools at the disposal of the Coast Guard to keep bridges in New York City safe. But like with the White Lion and the Francis Scott Key Bridge, the name of this ship is also symbolic. Cuauhtemoc, who was the last Aztec ruler before the Spanish came in, and the downfall of the Aztec Empire. Matter of fact, the name Cuauhtemoc means one who has descended like an eagle, a descending eagle, an eagle crashing down, crashing into this bridge. So if we're playing by the rules of Leave the World Behind, a movie where a lot of things came into fruition, then this could possibly be a metaphor for the downfall of the United States, the fall of the eagle. There was also another show that came out on Netflix very recently at the beginning of 2025 called 0 Day, which starred Robert De Niro, and it had to do with a cyber hack. There was planes that were crashing left and right, just like Leave the World Behind and like we're seeing with the beginning of 2025. But also in that series, they had shown us that trains were also derailing and trains were crashing into one another. Well, last week, and not a lot of people are talking about this, but there were a bunch of derailments that happened around the same time. There were derailments in South Dakota, Louisiana, Ohio, Kentucky, a train derailment in Pennsylvania, and 2 trains in the span of 2 days had derailed in Canada as they were entering the United States. There was also a derailment in Georgia that also happened around the same time. And what's even more bizarre is that as this derailment occurred, there was a major blackout in the Atlanta airport, one of the most busiest airports in the United States. This is happening at the same time that Newark, the Newark airport, was also having multiple blackouts as well. And there was also power issues in the airport of Texas. When it came to this train derailment in Atlanta, Georgia, that happened around the same time of this airport blackout in Atlanta, Georgia, nobody knows what caused this derailment. They're saying that the train was not overpacked. It was going at normal speed. And investigators so far are saying that there was nothing wrong with the track. This is all playing out like it's intended to do, like they have been showing us in these movies like Leave the World Behind, these TV series like 0 Day. It's all playing out as scripted. What does it all lead to? Well, they show us where it all leads to. It leads to a massive power outage, a massive blackout, everything being destroyed from within, while the powers that be and so forth hide in their fabulous underground bunkers. Why do you think they keep telling us about all these bunkers that they have, how the government spent $21 trillion to build this massive underground city, and just recently news came out where they upgraded this massive underground bunker within a mountain. Like this article here from USA Today, which was published on April 30th, the United States government is upgrading a secretive FEMA bunker. Why? That's classified. So this bunker that was used during the 9/11 attacks has been upgraded, and they're not telling anybody as to why. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this channel and you want to see
Coffee, follow me.